How would you feel if your fiancé ended your 3-year relationship with a 4-sentence email? Olivia thought she had it all: a thriving career, a beautiful apartment, and a fiancé she believed was her soulmate. But one Tuesday morning, Chad shattered everything with a cowardly email sent just 32 days before their wedding. No explanation, no remorse. But Chad didn't know Olivia wasn't as naive as he thought. She had already uncovered his lies, his secret plans, and the woman he had been seeing behind her back. He thought he could walk away without consequences. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Stay tuned to see how Olivia turns the tables, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. That was the entire email from Chad, sent at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly 32 days before our wedding. I stared at my phone screen, my coffee growing cold beside my laptop as my world tilted sideways. 3 years together, 8 months of engagement, and hundreds of I love yous, all dismissed in 4 sentences. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I'm a 30-year-old interior designer in Boston. Until that morning, I thought I was living the dream successful career. Beautiful downtown apartment, engaged to a man I believed was my soulmate. Chad and I met at a charity gala where his investment firm was a major donor. He swept me off my feet with his charm, intelligence, and what I thought was genuine kindness. Looking back, I should have seen the signs much earlier. The expensive gifts he couldn't quite afford. The late-night work meetings that left his collar smelling of unfamiliar perfume. The way he'd get defensive whenever I questioned unusual charges on our joint account. But love has a way of making you ignore the red flags, doesn't it? Even when they're waving right in front of your face. "Have you seen this?" I texted my best friend Sarah, forwarding Chad's email. Her response was immediate. "I'm coming over. Don't do anything yet." She found me still sitting at my kitchen island, surrounded by wedding invitation samples that had arrived that morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Join us in celebrating our love," printed in elegant gold foil, while my phone displayed the death certificate of our relationship. "What kind of coward breaks up over email?" Sarah's voice shook with anger. "After everything you've done for him." She wasn't wrong. I'd supported Chad through his temporary financial difficulties, helped him network for better clients, even agreed to postpone buying our own place so he could invest more in his business ventures. But here's what Chad didn't know: I wasn't as naive as he thought. For the past 3 months, I had been quietly documenting his suspicious behavior. The heirloom engagement ring he gave me? I'd already discovered it was a recent purchase from a luxury resale shop. I had sold it 2 weeks ago when I found lipstick on his dress shirt that he couldn't explain. The money from that ring was sitting in a separate account, waiting for… what? I hadn't been sure. Until now. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Chad thought he could simply email his way out of our life together. He was about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating the wrong woman. The weeks leading up to Chad's email had been filled with signs I could no longer ignore. The hushed phone calls taken in the hallway. The business dinners at restaurants that just so happened to be closed those nights. The big conferences that mysteriously never appeared on his company's calendar. Each lie had been like a tiny stone in my shoe, irritating but not quite painful enough to make me stop walking. I had met Chad's parents several times, both of them beaming with pride over their only son. His mother, Susan, had taken me wedding dress shopping, tearing up as I tried on a lace gown that cost more than my first car. His father, James, had pulled me aside at our engagement party, telling me how happy he was that Chad had finally found the one. Now I wondered, did they know about their son's double life? Or had they been fooled just as I had? Looking back, the changes had started around March. Chad began working late, claiming his firm was handling a big merger. But one night, I ran into his colleague Scott at the grocery store. "Merger?" Scott had repeated, eyebrows knitting together. "We haven't had any major deals since January." The confusion in his voice had been clear. When I mentioned it to Chad later that night, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he turned it around on me, accused me of spying on him, made me feel like the one who was breaking trust. I should have walked away then. But I didn't, because love makes you ignore the red flags until the day they're wrapped around your throat. That night I couldn't sleep. While Chad snored beside me, I opened his laptop, something I'd never done before. His password was still my birthday, which should have been touching, but now felt like laziness. What I found made my stomach churn. Emails to real estate agents about viewing properties in Chicago, searches for jobs in the Midwest, and most telling, dozens of messages to someone named Ashley. "I can't stand the guilt anymore," one email read. "A deserves better than this, but I can't help how I feel about you." The timestamp showed 3:00 a.m., sent on a night he'd told me he was working late at the office. That's when I decided to sell the ring. I remembered how proud he'd been giving it to me, spinning a story about his grandmother wearing it through 50 years of marriage. The truth came out when I had it appraised. It was barely 2 years old, purchased from an upscale consignment shop. The $15,000 I got for it felt like insurance, protection against whatever storm was coming. Sarah's voice pulled me back to the present. "Earth to Olivia," she said, waving her hand in front of my face. "What do you want to do about the vendors? The venue deposit?" I took a deep breath, my mind surprisingly clear. "First, I need to make a phone call," I said, pulling up the contact information for Jake Hayes, a private investigator recommended by a client. "Then we're going to find out exactly who this someone better is." Meeting Jake Hayes felt surreal. His office was nothing like the dim, smoky spaces you see in movies. Instead, it was modern, bright, and professional. He listened intently as I laid out what I knew, taking notes on a sleek tablet. "So, this joint account," he said, gesturing at the bank statements I'd brought. "These charges here, $4,800 at the Peninsula Hotel, $3,200 at Tiffany's, none of these were for you?" "Not a single one," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And they all happened on days he claimed to be at work conferences or client meetings." Jake nodded, his expression neutral but focused. "And you said he's planning something in Chicago?" "That's what his email suggested, but I only saw glimpses before I lost my nerve about snooping." I pulled out my checkbook. "I have $15,000. Dollars from selling the ring. Will that be enough?" "More than enough," Jake assured me. "I'll start with his financial records and recent travel patterns. Give me a week." That week felt like the longest of my life. I threw myself into work, grateful that interior design required enough focus to keep my mind occupied. My clients never suspected that their normally cheerful designer was tracking her fiancé's betrayal between choosing paint swatches and ordering custom furniture. Then Jake called. "Can you meet today?" His office felt smaller somehow as he spread photos across his desk. Chad entering high-end restaurants with a tall brunette, the same woman getting into his car, receipts for flights to Chicago, hotel stays, jewelry. "Her name is Ashley Winters," Jake explained. "She's a pharmaceutical sales rep. He met at a networking event last year. They've been seeing each other since March." March. The month everything started changing. "There's more," Jake continued, pulling out financial records. "Mr. Bennett has been living well beyond his means, credit card debt, personal loans, even some gambling debts. It seems he's been using your joint account to maintain appearances with both relationships." My hands shook as I looked through the evidence. Chad had spent thousands whining and dining Ashley while using my money to cover his tracks. The Chicago plans weren't just about love. He was running from debt collectors, planning to start fresh with Ashley in a new city. "What are my options?" I asked. Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Well, that depends on what you want. We have enough here to cause serious problems for his firm. Their financial disclosure policies are strict. We could also make sure Ashley sees these credit reports and collection notices. Or," he paused, his voice deliberate, "we could do something more strategic, make him face everything at once, his lies, his debts, his carefully constructed house of cards. But it would need to be handled carefully." I thought about Chad's dismissive email, the effortless cruelty in the way he had discarded our relationship, like I had never mattered. A plan began taking shape in my mind. "Tell me more about being strategic," I said. The first phase was simple, a text. "I accept your decision. I just need you to come get your things." His reply was almost insultingly quick. "I'll send movers next week." "No," I responded. "There are personal documents and family photos. You need to come yourself, Friday at 6. While waiting for Friday, I stayed busy. Jake had uncovered a very interesting detail. Ashley's company had strict policies about dating clients. And guess who had recently signed a major contract with her firm? Meanwhile, Chad's boss, Richard, was known for his obsession with ethical conduct, especially after a recent financial scandal had rocked their firm. I invited Sarah over to help set the stage. We arranged Chad's belongings neatly, placing everything in labeled boxes, printouts of his secret emails with Ashley, bank statements exposing his extravagant double life, and photos from Jake's surveillance, all sitting innocently, waiting to be discovered. At 5:55 p.m. on Friday, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find not just Chad, but Ashley standing beside him. My heart clenched for a split second, but I kept my expression fresh, neutral. She was beautiful, I had to admit, tall, elegant, and looking very uncomfortable. "So I thought it would be better if we were honest about everything," Chad said, his usual confidence flickering at my lack of reaction. Ashley wanted to. I cut him off. "You're both here. Come in." They followed me into the living room, where Richard was already sitting on my couch. Chad froze. The color drained from his face. "Richard? What are you—" "I invited him," I said calmly. "Since we're being honest about everything. Those boxes are yours, by the way. Feel free to look through them." Ashley was the first to reach for one, pulling out the credit reports and collection notices. Her perfectly polished composure cracked as she scanned the papers. "What is this?" she demanded, turning to Chad. "You said you were financially secure. You said—" "There's more," I interrupted, gesturing to the other boxes. "Like the records of how he used my money to fund your dates. And of course, documentation of how he violated his firm's financial disclosure agreements." I turned to Ashley, watching the realization sink in. "Oh, and your company might be interested in knowing how you've been dating a client." Richard stood, his face like a storm brewing. "Bennett, my office, 8 o'clock a.m., Monday." "This isn't what it looks like," Chad stammered, but Richard was already walking out. Ashley snatched her designer bag, shaking with fury. "You told me you were practically single, that she was just a convenient financial arrangement. You said—" Her voice broke. Tears spilled down her face as she turned and rushed out. And just like that, Chad's carefully constructed world collapsed. Chad stood alone in my living room, surrounded by evidence of his deceptions. "Olivia, please, I can explain everything." "No need," I said. "Your email was quite clear. You found someone better, remember? Although I'm not sure she thinks so anymore." Chad paced my living room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "You had no right to do this," he sputtered, his composed facade crumbling. "You went through my private information, hired someone to follow me. Just like you had no right to drain our joint account buying gifts for Ashley." I kept my voice steady. "Or use my credit card points for your romantic getaways." He grabbed one of the boxes, rifling through documents. "This could ruin me," he said, his voice rising. "Richard is going to fire me. Ashley's company will blacklist me. How could you be so vindictive?" "Vindictive?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You ended our 3-year relationship by email, Chad. You were planning to abandon me with wedding debt while you started fresh in Chicago, and I'm vindictive?" His expression shifted, trying to find the charming smile that had once made me weak in the knees. "Look, I know I handled things badly, but we can fix this. I'll break it off with Ashley. We can work something out with Richard. Just help me clean up this mess." "No, the same way you helped me plan our wedding while apartment hunting with another woman?" I pulled out my phone, showing him screenshots of his real estate searches. "Or the way you helped me pick out wedding invitations right after booking a romantic weekend with Ashley?" "That's different," he protested weakly. "I was confused. I made mistakes." "No," I said firmly. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying the wrong thing in an argument. You orchestrated an entire double life. You lied to everyone. Me, Ashley, your firm, even your parents." The mention of his parents made him flinch. "They know, by the way." I delivered the final blow. "I sent them copies of everything yesterday. Your mother called me this morning crying. She wanted me to tell you she's devastated, not just about Ashley, but about the gambling debts, the lying, all of it." Chad sank onto my couch, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face ashen. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the successful, confident man I'd fallen in love with, but as someone who'd built his entire life on deception. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Money? An apology? Name it." I walked to the door and opened it. "I want you to leave. Take your boxes. You'll need those documents for the meetings I'm sure are coming up. Your firm's HR department, Ashley's company's legal team, the debt collectors. They'll all want to talk to you." "Olivia, please." "Goodbye, Chad. I hope she was worth it." After Chad left, things moved quickly. Within a week, he'd lost his job. Apparently, Richard had been looking for a reason to let him go, and my evidence provided several. Ashley's company launched an ethics investigation, forcing her to resign. And those Chicago real estate agents? They weren't too happy when they learned about Chad's financial situation. I threw myself into work, grateful for understanding clients and endless design decisions that needed my attention. But late at night, when my apartment felt too quiet, doubts would creep in. Had I gone too far? Was I just as bad as him, plotting revenge instead of walking away? Then I'd remember his email, 4 cold sentences dismissing our entire relationship, the countless lies, the money he'd spent on Ashley while telling me we needed to budget carefully for our future. A month after the confrontation, I met Jake for coffee to close out his investigation. "I thought you'd want to know," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Chad's moved back in with his parents in New Hampshire. His father is trying to help him sort out the debt situation, but it's worse than we initially thought. The gambling wasn't just casual. He has some serious markers out there." I nodded, uncertain of what to feel. "And Ashley took a job in California. From what I can tell, she wants nothing to do with him." Jake paused, studying me. "You know, in my line of work, I see a lot of people seeking revenge. Most of them go about it all wrong, letting anger drive them to actions that only hurt themselves in the end. But you simply exposed the truth. Everything that's happened to him is a direct result of his own choices. Sometimes the truth is the best revenge." I thought about how effortlessly Chad had woven his lies, how easily he had kept up the facade. I just made sure everyone saw it at once. Jake smiled. "Well, your retainer still has some money left. Want me to keep tabs on him?" I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I'm done. He can figure out his own life now." As I walked home, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Lunch tomorrow? That new place on Newberry Street, my treat." "Teen," I smiled, thinking of how she had stood by me through everything. And that's when I realized the weight I had been carrying, the constant tension in my shoulders, was gone. Chad's betrayal had broken my heart, yes, but it hadn't broken me. Instead, it had revealed something I had never fully recognized: my strength. The truth had been my weapon, and I had wielded it perfectly. Chad had thought he could press send on an email and walk away unscathed. Instead, his carefully built house of cards had collapsed, leaving him alone to face the fallout of every lie he had told. The next few months brought changes I never expected. Without Chad constantly draining my finances, my savings flourished. I took on more high-end design projects, attracting clients who valued my eye for detail and trusted my judgment. My portfolio expanded, and with it, so did my confidence. One morning, while grabbing coffee at my usual spot, I ran into Richard, Chad's former boss. He had played a crucial role in the aftermath of my revelation, though we had never spoken about it directly. "Olivia," he greeted warmly. "How are you holding up?" I stirred my latte, considering the question. "Actually, I'm doing really well. Better than I expected." He nodded, then hesitated. "Listen, I should have told you this sooner. We had been investigating Chad's accounts for months before everything came out. There were irregularities we couldn't ignore, but we had no idea about the personal side of things. You, Ashley, the gambling. You did us a favor by bringing it all to light at once." "I just needed the truth to come out," I said simply. "Everything else was just consequences." "Well, speaking of consequences," Richard continued, "we're redesigning our office space, all 40,000 square feet of it. Would you be interested in submitting a proposal? Your reputation in the design community is excellent, and after everything, well, let's just say I trust your attention to detail." That project became my biggest yet, a full-scale corporate redesign that would cement my firm's place in the industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chad's downfall had led to my greatest professional breakthrough. My parents, once devastated over the wedding cancellation, now proudly told their friends about their daughter, the successful businesswoman. Mom even admitted, somewhat sheepishly, that she had never fully trusted Chad. Something about him was too polished, she confessed one evening, like he was trying too hard to be perfect. I had once thought my world would collapse without him. Instead, I had built something stronger, something real. Chad's absence didn't leave an empty space in my life. It made room for something better. Sarah convinced me to start dating again. Though I was hesitant, not everyone is hiding a secret life, she insisted, and now you know the red flags to watch for. She was right about the red flags. I found myself noticing things I might have overlooked before. Inconsistencies in stories, subtle manipulations, the way some men talked about their exes. Each observation felt like a small victory, proof that I'd learned from my experience rather than being broken by it. The last ties to Chad unraveled slowly. His mother called one last time, apologizing again for her son's behavior and returning a family necklace I'd left at their house. I donated all the wedding items we'd collected. No point in keeping reminders of a bullet dodged, the save-the-date cards, the venue deposit, the carefully chosen color swatches. All of it went away, making room for new possibilities. Sometimes, usually late at night, I'd think about Ashley. Had she been as fooled as I was? Did she lie awake wondering which parts of her relationship with Chad had been real? I hoped she'd found her way to a better life too, free from his web of deception. The engagement ring money, my inadvertent escape fund, turned out to be seed money for expanding my business. I hired 2 junior designers and moved into a proper office space. Every time I signed a new client contract or approved a design concept, I thought about Chad's dismissive email. He thought he was ending my story, but really he just freed me to write a better one. Almost a year after Chad's email, I received an unexpected message from Ashley. She was back in Boston briefly and wanted to meet. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else, and we arranged to meet at a quiet cafe away from the business district. She looked different from that day in my apartment, less polished but somehow more real. She'd cut her long hair into a practical bob and traded her designer clothes for simple business casual. We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence until she finally spoke. "I've been wanting to thank you," she said, turning her cup slowly. "Not just for exposing Chad, but for doing it the way you did, all at once, with everyone present." It was humiliating at the time, but it was like ripping off a bandage, painful but quick. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "How are you doing now?" "Better, much better. The job in California was a fresh start. I'm dating someone new, an architect. He's real, no hidden life, no secret debts, just an honest man who actually cares." She paused. "I heard through mutual friends that Chad tried to contact you." He did," I confirmed, remembering the desperate voicemails and emails that had started arriving about 6 months after the confrontation. "I never responded." "Me neither," Ashley said. "Though he tried hard enough, sent flowers to my office in San Francisco, called my parents, even tried to reach me through LinkedIn." She shook her head. "It's like he still doesn't get it. He's not sorry for what he did. He's just sorry he got caught." We talked for almost 2 hours, filling in the gaps in each other's stories. Her version of Chad had been completely different from mine. He'd played the role of a successful, single businessman, telling her his long hours were due to building his own investment portfolio. He'd even hinted at marriage, all while planning a wedding with me. "You know what the strangest part is?" Ashley said as we prepared to leave. "In all the time we dated, he never once let me see his place. Always had an excuse. Renovations, bad timing, nosy roommate. Now I know why." I laughed despite myself. He told me he was renovating his office for 6 months straight. I guess juggling lies gets complicated. Before we parted, Ashley handed me an envelope. "These were in my things. I thought you might want to decide what to do with them." Inside were photos of Chad and me from happier times. Parties, vacations, casual moments I hadn't known were photographed. I'd appeared in the background of pictures meant to capture his time with Ashley. I dropped the envelope in the first trash can I passed. Those memories, like Chad himself, no longer had any power over me. My life had moved in a different direction, one with more honesty, success, and genuine relationships than I'd had when I was planning a future with him. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah and told her about meeting Ashley. She raised her glass with a knowing smile. "You both dodged a bullet," she said. "Here's to seeing through the lies and coming out stronger." I clinked my glass against hers, thinking about how far I had come. "Here's to knowing your own worth," I added, "and never settling for less." Looking back now, I barely recognized the woman who once sat staring at that cold email from Chad. She was someone who believed love meant accepting lies, who measured her worth through someone else's validation. The journey from that morning to where I am now wasn't easy, but it transformed me in ways I never expected. My design firm has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. The project for Richard's company opened doors to other corporate clients, and I've since hired 3 more designers just to keep up with demand. Last month, a prestigious design magazine featured our work on their cover, a stunning restoration project that perfectly captured my philosophy of blending elegance with authenticity. The money I got from selling Chad's ring turned out to be the best investment I ever made. Not just financially, but emotionally. It taught me to trust my instincts, to act decisively when something feels wrong. That lesson has served me well in business and in life. Sarah jokes that I should thank Chad for setting me free, but I don't give him that much credit. My success came from choosing myself, from refusing to let his betrayal define me. Instead of drowning in hurt and anger, I channeled those emotions into building something meaningful. Sometimes new clients notice the faint, ring-shaped tan line still visible on my finger. I used to feel embarrassed, but now I tell them the truth. It's a reminder of the moment I chose truth over comfortable lies, strength over safety, and self-respect over settling. That fading mark doesn't symbolize loss. It represents everything I gained. My independence, my confidence, and most importantly, my belief in myself. Last week, I met a new client at the same restaurant where Chad had once proposed. As I waited for her to arrive, I caught my reflection in the window, confident, successful, at peace. The hostess recognized me and mentioned that Chad had been in recently, looking worse for wear, trying to impress a date with grand stories about his upcoming business ventures. Some things never change, but I have. The woman who once twisted herself into knots trying to understand his lies now runs a thriving business built on transparency and trust. The engagement ring money that was meant to bind me to him instead set me free. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor that way. Sarah keeps telling me I should write a book about my experience, but I don't think that's necessary. Instead, I share my story with other women who come to me feeling trapped or betrayed. I tell them what I wish someone had told me, that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best version of yourself. I still believe in love, but now I know that real love should never require you to compromise your integrity or silence your instincts. Real love builds you up. It doesn't tear you down. It's based on truth, not carefully constructed lies. The tears and heartbreak of that Tuesday morning email feel like another lifetime now. In choosing to fight back with truth instead of sinking to Chad's level of deception, I found my own strength, and that, more than any revenge, has been the sweetest victory of all. What do you do when the man you planned to marry reduces your entire relationship to 4 sentences in an email? Do you drown in heartbreak, or do you take control and expose the truth? Olivia spent years believing in a man who built his life on deception. Chad thought he could slip away quietly, leaving her with the emotional wreckage while he started fresh. But what he never expected was that Olivia had already unraveled his lies, his double life, his hidden debts, his carefully curated illusions. And when she set the stage for his downfall, he walked straight into it. She didn't seek revenge. She simply let the truth speak for itself. In one night, Chad lost everything: his job, his reputation, his new relationship. The same lies he used to manipulate others became the very chains that destroyed him. Meanwhile, Olivia walked away with her dignity intact, proving that the best response to betrayal isn't anger, it's success. Now, she's thriving. Her business is booming, her confidence is unshaken, and the weight of Chad's lies is nothing more than a fading memory. She didn't just survive, she turned his betrayal into her greatest victory. So, here's the real question. Would you have done the same? Would you have let him walk away, or would you have ensured that every lie he told came back to haunt him? Let's talk about it in the comments, and if you loved this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.
I smoothed my dress for the 100th time, fussing with the neckline as I surveyed the dining room. Everything had to be perfect for Thomas's celebration dinner. The promotion he'd worked so hard for had finally come through, and I wanted this night to be special. "Vivian, honey, have you seen my blue tie?" Thomas called from upstairs. "Check the second drawer, dear," I replied, lighting the candles on the table. The flickering flames cast a warm glow across the china plates and crystal glasses. I smiled, remembering our wedding day when we'd received this set as a gift. 10 years had flown by in the blink of an eye. Thomas's footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my reverie. He appeared in the doorway, looking dashing in his tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Even after all these years, he still had that effect on me. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Vice President," I teased, straightening his tie. He chuckled, pulling me close. "I couldn't have done it without you, Viv. You've been my rock through it all." The doorbell chimed, interrupting our moment. "That'll be Sam and Jack," I said, giving Thomas a quick peck on the cheek before heading to answer the door. Samantha, my best friend since college, greeted me with a warm hug. "Congratulations, you two," she exclaimed, handing me a bottle of champagne. Her husband, Jack, nodded in agreement, clapping Thomas on the back as they made their way inside. As we settled around the table, the conversation flowed easily. We laughed over shared memories and toasted to new beginnings. It wasn't until dessert that I noticed something was off. Thomas's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it, a small smile playing on his lips. "Everything okay?" I asked, curious about what could be so engaging. "Oh, just work stuff," he replied, tucking the phone away. But I caught the way his eyes lit up, a spark I hadn't seen in a while. Sam must have noticed too, because she shot me a questioning look. I shrugged it off, determined not to let anything dampen the evening. As our guests were leaving, Sam pulled me aside. "Viv, is everything all right with you and Thomas?" she whispered, concern etched on her face. "Of course," I replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated. "It's probably nothing, but Jack mentioned that Thomas has been spending a lot of time with his new mentee at work. Elizabeth, I think her name is?" My stomach clenched. "I'm sure it's just part of his new responsibilities," I said, forcing a smile. But Sam's words had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. Later that night, as Thomas and I cleaned up, I couldn't help but ask, "So, how's the mentoring going? With Elizabeth, right?" Thomas's hand paused mid-wipe of a plate. "It's fine," he said, his tone suddenly guarded. "She's bright, catches on quickly." "That's good," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Maybe we should have her over for dinner sometime. I'd love to meet her." Thomas's response was oddly terse. "I don't think that's necessary, Viv. It's just work." As I lay in bed that night, Thomas's arm draped over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The seed of doubt Sam had planted began to grow, and I found myself wondering what other changes this promotion might bring to our lives. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a storm that would shake the very foundation of our marriage. The weeks following Thomas's promotion flew by in a whirlwind of late nights and business dinners. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, but it grew harder with each passing day. Thomas's phone buzzed constantly, and his eyes lit up every time he checked it. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Thomas's phone chimed on the nightstand. I hesitated for a moment before glancing at the screen. A message from Elizabeth flashed across it. "Can't wait for our lunch tomorrow. You always brighten my day." My heart sank. I placed the phone back, my hands trembling slightly. When Thomas came home that night, I couldn't help but confront him. "How was work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Busy as usual," he replied, loosening his tie. "Got a big presentation coming up." And how's Elizabeth doing? I saw her message about lunch tomorrow. Thomas froze for a split second before recovering. Oh, that? It's just a mentoring lunch. Nothing to worry about, Viv. But I could see the guilt flickering in his eyes. Thomas, be honest with me. Is there something going on between you two? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of course not. She's just a colleague. You're being paranoid, Vivian. His dismissive tone stung. Paranoid, Thomas. You light up every time her name is mentioned. I'm not blind. Don't be ridiculous, he snapped. I'm not some hormonal teenager. I can have female friends without it meaning anything. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Friends don't make their spouses feel like this, Thomas. He stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. The next day, I couldn't concentrate at work. My mind kept wandering to Thomas and Elizabeth, imagining their lunch together. When I got home, I found Thomas in his study, engrossed in his laptop. How was your day? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. He barely looked up. Fine. Busy? And lunch with Elizabeth? This time he did look up, irritation clear on his face. It was just lunch, Vivian. Drop it. But I couldn't. You used to tell me about your day, about the people you work with. Now it's like pulling teeth to get any information out of you. Thomas slammed his laptop shut. Maybe because you turn everything into an interrogation. I'm trying to focus on my career, Vivian. I thought you'd be supportive. I am supportive, I protested, but not at the expense of our marriage. He stood up abruptly. I need some air, he muttered, brushing past me. I heard the front door slam a few moments later. Sinking into his chair, I noticed a post-it note on his desk. In neat handwriting it read, Elizabeth, dinner reservations Friday 8 p.m. My world tilted on its axis. Dinner reservations? On a Friday night? This was more than mentoring. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed Sam's number. Viv, what's wrong? Sam's concerned voice came through. It's Thomas, I choked out. I think he's having an affair with Elizabeth. There was a pause on the other end. Oh, honey, I was hoping I was wrong, but I've heard rumors at the office. My heart shattered. What do I do, Sam? First, take a deep breath, she said gently. We'll figure this out together. Why don't you come over? Jack's out of town, and I think you could use a friend right now. As I hung up, I caught sight of our wedding photo on the bookshelf. Thomas's smiling face mocked me. How had we gone from that happy couple to this? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? With a heavy heart, I grabbed my keys and headed for Sam's house, leaving behind the shattered remains of my once perfect life. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing the fine lines around my eyes that seemed to have deepened overnight. The weight of Thomas's betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders, aging me beyond my years. As I applied concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder if this was why Thomas had turned to Elizabeth. The sound of the front door closing jolted me from my thoughts. Thomas was home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Vivian? Thomas called out. We need to talk. I stepped out of the bathroom, my heart pounding. Yes, we do. Thomas was standing in the living room, his suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. He looked tired, but there was a strange energy about him. I think we should discuss what's been going on, he said, his voice unnaturally calm. You mean your affair with Elizabeth? The words came out sharper than I intended. He flinched. It's not an affair, Vivian, but I can't deny that there's something there. I felt my world crumbling around me. Something there? Thomas, you're married. To me, remember? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. Of course I remember. But Vivian, when was the last time we really connected? When was the last time you showed any interest in my work, my ambitions? His words hit me like a slap. I've always supported you, Thomas. I've been here, by your side, through everything. But that's just it, he said, his voice rising. You've been here, but have you really been present? Elizabeth, she understands me. She's passionate about her career, about making a difference. When I'm with her, I feel alive. Each word was a dagger to my heart. And with me, you feel, what? Dead? Thomas sighed. That's not what I meant. It's just... Elizabeth is so vibrant, so full of life. She reminds me of you when we first met. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So because I'm not in my 20s anymore, I'm no longer good enough for you? That's not fair, Vivian, Thomas protested. It's not about age, it's about connection, about shared goals and interests. And what about our shared life, Thomas? Our history, our plans for the future? My voice cracked with emotion. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know if those plans fit who I am anymore, Viv. I'm changing, growing. Elizabeth challenges me in ways I never expected. I felt a surge of anger. And I don't challenge you? Is that what you're saying? You used to, he said softly. But lately it feels like we're just going through the motions. Elizabeth makes me feel alive again. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. So what are you saying, Thomas? That you want to leave me for her? He hesitated, and in that moment of silence, I knew, my world shattered completely. I don't know what I want, he finally said, but I can't ignore these feelings anymore. I stood there, frozen, as the reality of our situation crashed over me. This wasn't just a fleeting infatuation or a midlife crisis. This was the end of everything I thought we had built together. I think you should leave, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas looked shocked. Vivian, No, I cut him off. I can't do this right now. I need time to think, to process. Please, just go. He nodded slowly, grabbing his jacket. As he reached the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, Viv. I never meant for this to happen. The door closed behind him, and I collapsed onto the couch, sobs racking my body. How had we come to this? And more importantly, where did we go from here? As the tears subsided, a new emotion began to take root, determination. If Thomas thought he could just throw away our marriage for a younger model, he had another thing coming. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days after Thomas left were a blur of tears and sleepless nights. I threw myself into work, desperate for any distraction from the gaping hole in my life. But even at the hospital, surrounded by the constant bustle of patients and colleagues, I couldn't escape the crushing weight of betrayal. It was during a particularly grueling shift that I received the text that would change everything. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ducked into the break room to check it. Thomas, we need to talk. I'm moving out. Can I come by tonight to get some things? My hands shook as I read the message. This was really happening. He was leaving me for her. I managed to finish my shift, though I couldn't tell you a single thing I did. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, grief, and a growing sense of determination. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I wouldn't let Thomas see me broken. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. sharp. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Thomas stood there, looking uncomfortable. Hi, Viv. Can I come in? I stepped aside wordlessly, letting him enter. He glanced around the living room, his eyes lingering on the empty spaces where his things used to be. I've already packed most of your stuff, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's in boxes in the spare room. He looked surprised. Oh, thanks, I guess. An awkward silence fell between us. This man, who I had loved for over a decade, now felt like a stranger in our home. So, I finally said, you're really doing this? Throwing away our marriage for her? Thomas sighed. Vivian, it's not like that. Elizabeth and I, we connect on a level that you and I haven't in years. Something inside me snapped. Don't you dare try to justify this, Thomas. You made vows to me, for better or worse, remember? Or does that not apply when a younger, shinier model comes along? That's not fair, he protested. I didn't plan for this to happen, but I can't deny my feelings anymore. I laughed bitterly. Your feelings? What about my feelings, Thomas? Did you even consider them for a second? He had the decency to look ashamed. Of course I did. This isn't easy for me either, Viv. Oh, I'm sure it's so hard for you, I spat. Poor Thomas, torn between his loyal wife and his exciting new girlfriend. However will you cope? Vivian, please, he pleaded. Can't we do this civilly? I felt a surge of rage. Civilly? You want me to be civil while you destroy everything we've built together? While you humiliate me in front of our friends, our families? Thomas's face hardened. I didn't come here to fight. I'll get my things and go. As he turned towards the spare room, something in me broke. She doesn't love you, you know, I blurted out. He froze. What? Elizabeth, I said, my voice shaking. She doesn't love you. She's using you to advance her career. Thomas whirled around, his face a mix of anger and confusion. You don't know what you're talking about. Elizabeth and I know exactly what I'm talking about, I interrupted. I've heard things, Thomas, from people at your company. She has a reputation for latching onto successful men to climb the corporate ladder. I saw doubt flicker in his eyes, quickly replaced by anger. You're lying. You're just jealous because she's younger, more vibrant. More vibrant, I echoed, incredulous. Is that what this is about? You're having a midlife crisis and I'm just collateral damage? Thomas's face flushed. You know what? I don't have to listen to this. I'm leaving. As he stormed towards the door, I called after him. Go ahead, Thomas. Run to your precious Elizabeth, but don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you've made. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of our once happy home. I sank to the floor, my body shaking with sobs. But as the tears subsided, a new feeling emerged, a steely resolve. If Thomas thought he could discard me so easily, he had another thing coming. It was time to fight for what was mine, and heaven help anyone who stood in my way. The morning after Thomas left, I woke up with a newfound determination. I couldn't just sit around and let my life fall apart. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. I called in sick to work for the first time in years and dialed Sam's number. Sam, I need your help, I said as soon as she picked up. Can you meet me for coffee? An hour later, we were seated in a quiet corner of our favorite cafe. Sam's face was etched with concern. Viv, honey, how are you holding up? I took a deep breath. I'm managing, but I need to know more about Elizabeth. You work with her, right? Sam nodded, her expression turning guarded. I do, but Viv, are you sure you want to go down this road? I have to, Sam. I need to understand what's really going on. She sighed, then leaned in closer. All right, but you didn't hear this from me. Elizabeth, she has a reputation at the office. This isn't the first time she's gotten close to a senior executive. My heart raced. What do you mean? Last year, she was mentored by the CFO. He left his wife, but a few months later, Elizabeth moved on to greener pastures. The poor guy's career never recovered. I felt a mix of vindication and dread. So she's using Thomas? Sam nodded grimly. It looks that way. But Viv, there's more. I overheard her on the phone yesterday. She was talking to someone, I think her boyfriend, about a big promotion coming her way. My world tilted on its axis. Boyfriend? Are you sure? Pretty sure. She was talking about weekend plans and using pet names. It definitely wasn't Thomas she was talking to. I sat back, my mind reeling. Thomas wasn't just leaving me. He was being played for a fool. What are you going to do? Sam asked softly. I squared my shoulders. I'm going to fight for my marriage. The next few days were a whirlwind. I threw myself into uncovering everything I could about Elizabeth. I scoured social media, called in favors from mutual acquaintances, and even hired a private investigator. What I discovered left me feeling sick. Elizabeth had a long-term boyfriend who worked at a competing firm. Their social media was full of loved-up photos and plans for the future. Meanwhile, she was stringing Thomas along, using him to secure a major promotion. I was mulling over this information when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Thomas. Can we talk? I've been doing some thinking. My heart leaped. Was he having second thoughts? I quickly replied, agreeing to meet him at our favorite park the next day. As I approached our usual bench, I saw Thomas already seated, looking haggard and conflicted. He stood when he saw me, his eyes searching my face. Vivian, he began, his voice hoarse. I've made a terrible mistake. I felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. What do you mean, Thomas? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. I've been blind, Viv. Elizabeth, she's not who I thought she was. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I know about her boyfriend, Thomas, and her history with executives at the company. His face crumpled. You knew? Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? I asked softly. He looked away, shame written across his features. I don't know. I've been such a fool, Viv. Can you ever forgive me? I stood there, my emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to take him in my arms, to forgive and forget. But another part, a stronger part, held back. I don't know, Thomas, I said finally. You've hurt me deeply. You were ready to throw away our entire life together for a woman you barely knew. I know, he whispered. I'll do anything to make it right, Viv. Please, just tell me what I need to do. As I looked at him, broken and pleading, I realized I had a choice to make. Did I want to try and salvage our marriage, or was it time to walk away and start anew? The decision I made in that moment would shape the rest of my life. and as the weight of it settled on my shoulders, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, steeling myself for what was about to come. After days of internal struggle, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to confront Elizabeth face to face. The cafe where we agreed to meet was bustling with the lunch crowd. I spotted Elizabeth immediately, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit standing out among the sea of office workers. As I approached, she looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Vivian," she said, her voice cool and composed. "I must admit, I was surprised when you reached out." I slid into the seat across from her, my heart pounding. "Thank you for meeting me, Elizabeth. I think we have a lot to discuss." She raised an eyebrow. "Do we? I was under the impression that your situation with Thomas was resolved." I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. "That's exactly why I'm here. I know about your boyfriend, Elizabeth, and your history with executives at the company." For a split second, her carefully crafted facade cracked. Fear flashed in her eyes before she regained her composure. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Vivian." "I think you know exactly what I'm implying," I said, leaning forward. "You've been using Thomas to advance your career, haven't you? Just like you did with the CFO last year." Elizabeth's face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos my private investigator had taken of her with her boyfriend. "Care to explain these?" She stared at the images, her face paling. "How did you?" "It doesn't matter," I cut her off. "What matters is that you've been playing with people's lives, Elizabeth. With my life." To my surprise, Elizabeth's shoulders sagged. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability behind her polished exterior. "You don't understand," she said softly. "This job, this career, it's all I have. I've had to fight tooth and nail for every opportunity." "By destroying marriages?" I asked incredulously. She looked away. "I never meant for it to go this far with Thomas. He wouldn't take no for an answer. I thought if I played along, I could secure the promotion and then let him down gently." I felt a surge of anger. "Let him down gently? Do you have any idea what you've done to our marriage?" Elizabeth met my gaze, her eyes surprisingly sincere. "I'm sorry, Vivian. Truly. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I didn't know how to get out of it without jeopardizing everything I've worked for." As I sat there processing her words, I realized something. Elizabeth wasn't the villain I had painted her to be. She was just a woman trying to navigate a cutthroat world, making questionable choices along the way. "What are you going to do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth sighed. "I don't know. If this gets out, my career is over. But I can't keep living this lie." In that moment, I made a decision that surprised even me. "I won't expose you, Elizabeth," I said. "But you need to come clean to Thomas. He deserves to know the truth." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "I will, I promise." As we parted ways, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by a new burden. Now that I knew the truth, what was I going to do about my marriage? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw Thomas's car. He was waiting for me on the porch, his face etched with concern and hope. As I walked towards him, I realized that this was it, the moment that would define our future. With each step, I felt the weight of our history, the pain of betrayal, and the faint glimmer of possibility. "Vivian," Thomas said, his voice breaking, "can we talk?" I took a deep breath, knowing that whatever I said next would change everything. The future of our marriage hung in the balance, and the decision was mine to make. I stood on the porch facing Thomas, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of everything we'd been through, everything I'd learned, pressed down on me like a physical force. "Yes, Thomas, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We moved inside, the familiar surroundings of our home now feeling alien and tense. Thomas sat on the edge of the couch, his posture rigid with anxiety. "Vivian, I've made a terrible mistake," he began, his voice cracking. "I don't know what I was thinking. Elizabeth, I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I know about Elizabeth, Thomas. I know everything." His eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" "I mean I know about her boyfriend, her history with executives at the company, her using you for a promotion," I said, each word deliberate and heavy. Thomas's face crumpled, a mix of shame and disbelief washing over him. How did you find out? It doesn't matter, I replied, feeling a surge of strength. What matters is that I know, and now you know too. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. God, Vivian, I've been such a fool. Can you ever forgive me? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to say next. Forgiveness isn't the issue here, Thomas. The issue is trust. You were ready to throw away our entire marriage, our life together, for a fantasy. I know, he whispered, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. I'll do anything to make it right. Please, Viv, just tell me what I need to do. For a moment, I was tempted. The familiar pull of our shared history, the comfort of the known, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the casual cruelty of his comparisons between Elizabeth and me. I'm sorry, Thomas, I said, my voice soft but firm. But I don't think there's anything you can do. I've made my decision. He looked at me, confusion and fear dawning on his face. What do you mean? I squared my shoulders, drawing on a well of strength I didn't know I possessed. I want a divorce, Thomas. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Thomas stared at me, shock written across his features. Divorce? He echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Vivian, please, we can work this out. I love you. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of sadness and liberation. It's not about love anymore, Thomas. It's about respect, self-respect. And I've realized that I can't stay in a marriage where that's been so fundamentally broken. But what about our life together? Our plans? He stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. Those plans were for a different Vivian and Thomas, I replied. We're not those people anymore. As the reality of the situation sank in, Thomas's demeanor changed. Desperation gave way to anger. You can't do this, he said, his voice rising. You're throwing away years of marriage over one mistake. I stood my ground, unflinching. It wasn't just one mistake, Thomas. It was a series of choices that showed me exactly where I stood in your life, and I deserve better. You'll regret this, he spat, jumping to his feet. You're nothing without me, Vivian. Who do you think you are? His words, meant to hurt and diminish, instead filled me with a fierce determination. I'm Vivian, I said, my voice strong and clear, and I'm more than enough on my own. Thomas stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As the echo faded, I sank onto the couch, the enormity of what had just happened washing over me. Tears came then, a mix of grief for what was lost and relief for what was to come. As I sat there in the quiet of the house that had once been our home, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I, Vivian, would be the author of my own story. The road ahead would be challenging, I knew. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Because now I was fighting for myself. 1 year after I asked Thomas for a divorce, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my new blazer. The woman staring back at me was different from the one who had once defined herself as Thomas's wife. She was stronger, more confident, and unapologetically herself. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam. Good luck today. You've got this. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support throughout this tumultuous year. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my briefcase and headed out the door. The hospital boardroom was intimidating, filled with stern-faced executives. As the newly appointed head of nursing, I was presenting my plan to revolutionize patient care. As I began my presentation, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face at the back of the room. Thomas. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of recognition, then regret. But I didn't falter. Instead, I channeled all the strength I'd gained over the past year into my words, my vision for the future of healthcare. As I concluded, the room erupted in applause. The CEO stood up, beaming. Vivian, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. You have our full support. Elation washed over me. This was my moment, my triumph. As the room cleared out, Thomas approached hesitantly. Congratulations, Viv, he said softly. You were incredible. I nodded, maintaining my composure. Thank you, Thomas. He shifted uncomfortably. I heard about your promotion, and now this. You've really flourished. I have, I agreed, feeling a surge of pride. Thomas's face. I made a terrible mistake, Vivian. Leaving you was the biggest regret of my life. Elizabeth, she used you, I finished for him. I know, but Thomas, that's not why our marriage ended. It ended because you were willing to throw away everything we had built together. He nodded, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I know that now. Seeing you today, so confident and successful, I realized what I lost. Is there any chance we could? I held up a hand, stopping him. No, Thomas, what we had is gone. But I'm grateful for the journey, because it led me here. As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped, I felt no joy in his misery. Instead, I felt a profound sense of closure. Later that evening, I met Sam for dinner to celebrate. As we clinked glasses, she grinned at me. To Vivian 2.0, I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. You know, Sam, a year ago I thought my life was over. I thought Thomas's betrayal had broken me. Sam reached across the table, squeezing my hand. But it didn't. It made you stronger. I nodded, reflecting on the journey. It did. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to being someone's wife. It was always within me, waiting to be unleashed. As we finished our meal, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Elizabeth. I saw the news about your presentation. Congratulations, Vivian. What you've achieved is truly inspiring. I smiled, remembering our conversation a year ago. Elizabeth had kept her promise, coming clean to Thomas and facing the consequences of her actions. In an unexpected turn of events, we had developed a cautious friendship, bonding over our shared experiences in a male-dominated world. As Sam and I walked out of the restaurant, arm in arm, I looked up at the starry sky. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I had never dared to imagine before. You know, Sam, I said, I used to think that the best revenge would be seeing Thomas miserable. But now I realize the best revenge is living my best life. Sam grinned, giving me a playful nudge, and boy, are you living it. As we parted ways, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartbreak, but it had led me here, to this moment of triumph and self-discovery. I was Vivian, stronger and more vibrant than ever before. And this was just the beginning of my story. I smoothed my apron for the 100th time, trying to calm my nerves as I listened to the raised voices coming from the living room. It was happening again. Sam and his mother were at it, their argument echoing through our shared home. You can't keep meddling in our lives, Mom. Sam's voice cracked with frustration. I'm not meddling, I'm helping, his mother retorted. Someone has to keep this family together. I sighed, setting down the dish I'd been drying. It was always like this. Ever since Sam's parents moved in with us last year, the tension had been building. I'd tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law, but nothing seemed good enough for Margaret. The kitchen door swung open and Sam stormed in, his face flushed. Abby, I can't take it anymore. She's driving me crazy. I reached out to touch his arm. What happened this time? He ran a hand through his hair. She's been going through our bills, can you believe it? Says we're not managing our money right. What? I felt my own anger rising. That's none of her business. I know. Sam leaned against the counter, deflated. I told her to back off, but you know how she is. The kitchen door opened again, and Margaret swept in, her eyes narrowing when she saw us together. Samuel, we're not finished discussing this. I stepped forward, forcing a smile. Margaret, maybe we could all sit down and talk about this calmly? She turned her steely gaze on me. Abigail, dear, this is a family matter. Why don't you go finish the dishes? I felt my cheeks burn. I am family, Margaret. I'm your son's wife. Of course you are, she said, her tone dismissive. But you don't understand how things work in our family. Sam put his arm around me. Mom, that's enough. Abby's right. We should all talk about this together. Margaret's lips thinned. Fine, let's sit down then. We moved to the dining room, the tension thick in the air. I sat next to Sam, across from his parents. His father, Robert, looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between us. Now, Margaret began, folding her hands on the table, I think it's time we discuss the family finances. I couldn't hold back anymore. With all due respect, Margaret, our finances are not your concern. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, but they are, dear. You see, this house, it's still in our name. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? Sam turned to his father. Dad, is that true? Robert cleared his throat. Well, yes, we never got around to transferring the deed. You told us this was our house, I exclaimed, my voice rising. We've been paying the mortgage. Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And we appreciate that, but as long as our name is on the deed, we have a say in how things are run here. I looked at Sam, expecting him to protest, but he was staring at the table, his jaw clenched. Sam? I whispered, my heart pounding. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and defeat. I'm sorry, Abby, I didn't know. In that moment, something shifted. I saw my husband and his family in a new, unsettling light. This wasn't just about bills or a house. This was about control, about power. As I sat there, stunned into silence, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was built on shifting sand. And for the first time since I'd married into this family, I felt a spark of something dangerous ignite within me. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me, I muttered, fleeing the room. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I heard Margaret's voice floating up behind me. See, Samuel? This is why we need to step in. She clearly can't handle adult conversations. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it as tears threatened to spill. But beneath the hurt and betrayal, a new feeling was taking root. Determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as memories flooded my mind. Each recollection was like a piece of a puzzle, finally falling into place to reveal a picture I'd been too blind to see. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding, when Margaret accidentally spilled cranberry sauce on my new tablecloth. Oh, Abigail, she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, you really should use better quality linens. These cheap ones stain so easily. Sam's birthday last year, when she'd taken over the party planning. It's just that I know what Samuel likes, she'd explained, patting my hand condescendingly. You'll learn eventually, dear. And just last month, when she'd rearranged our entire kitchen while I was out grocery shopping, I couldn't stand to see it so disorganized, she'd said, ignoring my shocked expression. Now it's much more efficient. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. How had I not seen it before? The constant criticism, the undermining, the control, it wasn't just annoying behavior, it was manipulation. The next morning, I found Sam in the kitchen, looking exhausted. Hey, he said, barely meeting my eyes. About last night. I cut him off. Why didn't you tell me about the house, Sam? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I honestly didn't know, Abby. Dad always said it would be ours. But you never checked? Never thought to ask for the paperwork? I trusted them, he said, his voice small. They're my parents. I felt a surge of frustration. And what about trusting me? Your wife? Before he could answer, Margaret swept into the kitchen. Good morning, dears. Samuel, I've been thinking about what we discussed last night. I think it's time we had a family meeting about the household budget. I gritted my teeth. Margaret, we've already told you. Now, she interrupted, holding up a hand. Let's not get emotional. This is about what's best for the family. I looked at Sam, silently pleading for him to stand up to her. He cleared his throat. Mom, maybe we could discuss this later? Nonsense, she said briskly. There's no time like the present, she called out. Come down here, please. We're having a family meeting. As Robert shuffled in, looking uncomfortable, I felt something inside me snap. No, I said firmly. We're not having a family meeting. Not now, not ever. Margaret's eyes widened in shock. I beg your pardon? You heard me, I continued, my voice growing stronger. This is our home, our life. You don't get to make decisions for us anymore. Abigail, she gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. How dare you speak to me like that, after everything we've done for you? I laughed bitterly. Done for me? You mean criticizing every decision I make, undermining my role in this family, making me feel like I don't belong in my own home? Sam stepped forward, his face pale. Abby, calm down. Let's not say things we'll regret. I turned to him, my eyes blazing. And you? When are you going to stand up to her, Sam? When are you going to choose our marriage over her control? The kitchen fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Margaret's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sam opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. No, I'm done talking. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not. Something has to change, and it has to change now. With that, I stormed out of the kitchen, my heart pounding. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Margaret's shrill voice behind me. Samuel, are you going to let her speak to me like that? To us? Your family? I paused at the top of the stairs, waiting for Sam's response. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Finally, I heard his voice, quiet but clear. "Mom, I think Abby's right. We need to talk about some changes." As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, fear, but also a glimmer of hope. The battle lines had been drawn. Now it was time to fight for my marriage, my home, and my self-respect. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a war that would change everything. I needed to get out of the house. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel Margaret's disapproving glare burning into my back every time I passed her. I grabbed my gardening gloves and headed for the backyard, hoping some fresh air would clear my head. As I knelt in the dirt, yanking out weeds with more force than necessary, I heard a familiar voice call out. "Abigail? Everything all right over there?" I looked up to see Ellen, my next-door neighbor, peering over the fence. Her kind face was creased with concern. "Oh, Ellen," I sighed, brushing the dirt from my hands. "I don't even know where to start." She opened the gate between our yards and came to sit beside me on the garden bench. "Well, honey, why don't you try the beginning?" The words tumbled out of me like a dam bursting. I told her everything. The revelation about the house, Margaret's constant interference, Sam's inability to stand up to his mother. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face. Ellen handed me a tissue from her pocket. "Oh, Abigail, I had no idea things were so bad." "I didn't either," I admitted. "Or maybe I did and I just didn't want to see it." She patted my hand. "It's not your fault, dear. Some people are masters at manipulation. They can make you doubt your own mind." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, someone understood. "The question is," Ellen continued, her voice gentle but firm, "what are you going to do about it?" I took a deep breath. I think we need to move out, start fresh, just Sam and me." Ellen's eyebrows shot up. "That's a big step. Have you talked to Sam about this?" Before I could answer, I heard the back door slam. Sam strode across the yard, his face tight with anger. "Abby, we need to talk. Now." I stood up, my heart racing. "Sam, what's wrong?" He glanced at Ellen, then back at me. "Inside, please." I followed him into the house, throwing an apologetic look at Ellen over my shoulder. As soon as the door closed behind us, Sam rounded on me. "What did you say to my mother?" he demanded. I blinked, taken aback. "What? I haven't said anything to her since this morning." "Well, she's upstairs crying her eyes out, saying you've turned the whole family against her." I felt a surge of anger. "Are you kidding me? After everything she's done, she's playing the victim?" Sam ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "Look, I know things have been tense, but she's still my mother. You can't just—" "Can't what, Sam?" I interrupted. "Can't stand up for myself? Can't expect to be treated with respect in my own home?" "That's not what I meant," he backpedaled. "I just think we need to handle this delicately." I laughed bitterly. "Delicately? Like how she's been so delicate in tearing me down for years?" Sam's face softened. "Abby, please, let's just calm down and—" "No," I said firmly. "I'm done calming down. I'm done pretending everything is okay when it's not. We need to make a change, Sam, a big one." His eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm saying we need to move out. Find our own place. Just the two of us." The color drained from Sam's face. "Move out, but this is our home, our family." "Your family," I corrected, "not mine. Never mine, according to your mother." Sam opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by a shrill voice from upstairs. "Samuel, who are you talking to down there?" We both froze, staring at each other. In that moment, I saw something shift in Sam's eyes. A flicker of understanding, maybe even agreement. But before he could speak, Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes red and puffy. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false surprise. "It's you, Abigail. I thought I heard voices." As she descended the stairs, I felt my resolve harden. This was it, the moment of truth. I looked at Sam, silently pleading with him to stand with me, to choose our marriage over his mother's manipulation. His gaze darted between me and Margaret, indecision written all over his face. And in that suspended moment, with the air thick with tension, I realized that everything, my marriage, my future, my sanity, hinged on what happened next. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with the confrontation that was to come. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made my decision. It was time to talk to Sam, really talk to him, about our future. I found him in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes were rimmed with dark circles, mirroring my own sleepless night. "Sam," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk about what happened yesterday." He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. "I know, Abby. I've been thinking about it all night." I took a deep breath. I meant what I said. We need to move out, set some boundaries with your parents. Sam's grip tightened on his mug. "Abby, that's a big step. This is our home." "Is it?" I interrupted. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like we're just guests in your parents' house. Guests who pay the mortgage, but still have no say." He flinched at my words. "That's not fair. They've done a lot for us." "And we're grateful," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But Sam, can't you see how your mother's behavior is tearing us apart? We need our own space, our own life." Sam ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of his internal struggle. "I hear you, Abby. I do. But they're my family. I can't just abandon them." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Aren't I your family too?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched emotions play across Sam's face. Guilt, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Finally, he spoke. "Of course you are. You're my wife. I love you." "Then prove it," I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Stand with me on this. Let's start our life together, just us." Sam opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in our clasped hands. "Good morning," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I felt Sam's hand tense in mine, but I didn't let go. "Actually, Margaret, we were just discussing—" "Oh, I'm sure it can wait," she interrupted, bustling into the kitchen. "Samuel, dear, I need your help with something in the garage. That old chest of drawers is just too heavy for your father and me to move." I saw the conflict in Sam's eyes as he looked between his mother and me. My heart sank as he slowly pulled his hand away. "I'll be right there, Mom," he said, not meeting my gaze. As Margaret swept out of the room, Sam turned to me. "We'll finish this conversation later, okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As he left the kitchen, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine while my mind raced with plans. By the time lunch rolled around, I had made up my mind. I found Sam in the backyard, tinkering with the lawnmower. "We need to talk?" I said, my voice firm. "Now." He looked up. Surprise etched on his face. "Abby, I told you we'd finish our conversation later." "No," I cut him off. "We're doing this now. I've made a decision, Sam. If you won't move out with me, then I'll go alone." His face paled. "What? Abby, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I said, my heart pounding. "I love you, Sam, but I can't live like this anymore. Something has to change, and if you won't make that change with me, then I'll have to do it on my own." As the weight of my words settled between us, I saw a flicker of something in Sam's eyes. Fear, maybe, or realization. This was it, the moment that would define our future. "So," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what's it going to be, Sam? Are you with me, or not?" The ball was in his court now, and as I stood there, heart in my throat, I knew that whatever his answer, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed my ultimatum seemed to stretch for an eternity. Sam's face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, fear, and something that looked almost like admiration. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Abby, I don't want to lose you." I felt a glimmer of hope. "Then come with me, Sam. Let's start fresh, just the two of us." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before. "It's not that simple. They're my parents, Abby. I can't just abandon them." "And what about me?" I countered, my voice rising. "Am I supposed to just accept being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home?" Sam flinched at my words. "No, of course not. But maybe if we talk to them, explain how we're feeling." I cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Talk to them? Sam, we've been trying to talk to them for years. Nothing changes." Just then we heard the back door open. Margaret's voice floated out to us. "Samuel, are you out here? I need your help with something." I saw the conflict in Sam's eyes as he glanced towards the house. I should go see what she needs. Something inside me snapped. No, Sam, you need to stay here and finish this conversation with your wife. His eyes widened at my tone. Abby, Samuel. Margaret's voice was more insistent now. Sam looked torn, his gaze darting between me and the house. I held my breath, waiting for his decision. To my surprise, he called out, Just a minute, Mom. I'm talking to Abby. I felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived. Margaret appeared at the back door, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. What's going on out here? She demanded, striding towards us. I straightened my spine, ready for the confrontation. We're discussing our future, Margaret. Sam and I are thinking about moving out. The color drained from Margaret's face. Moving out? But why? This is your home. Is it? I challenged. Because it feels more like your home, where Sam and I just happen to live. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. How dare you, after everything we've done for you? That's enough, Mom, Sam interrupted, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. Abby's right. We need our own space. I felt a surge of pride and love for my husband in that moment. But Margaret wasn't done. Samuel, you can't be serious. What about your father and me? We need you here. Sam's resolve seemed to waver. We won't be far, Mom. We just need. Need what? Margaret's voice was shrill now. To abandon your family? Is that what she's convinced you to do? I'd had enough. Stop it, Margaret. This isn't about abandoning anyone. It's about Sam and I having our own life. Margaret turned on me, her eyes blazing. You've poisoned my son against us. I knew from the day he brought you home that you'd try to tear this family apart. Mom, Sam's voice was sharp. That's enough. But Margaret was on a roll. If you leave this house, Samuel, don't bother coming back. You'll no longer be welcome here. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Sam, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. Sam's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. He looked from his mother to me, indecision written all over his features. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. Sam, I love you, but I can't live like this anymore. If you choose to stay, I'll understand, but I'm leaving, with or without you. The ball was in Sam's court now. As I stood there, heart in my throat, I knew that his next words would determine the course of our future. The tension in the air was palpable as Sam opened his mouth to speak. The tension in the room was suffocating as Sam's words hung in the air. We're moving out, he said, his voice firm but tinged with sadness. Abby and I need our own space. Margaret's face contorted with rage. How dare you, after everything we've done for you? I stepped forward, my heart pounding. This isn't about what you've done for us, Margaret. It's about what we need to do for our marriage. Sam's father, Robert, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Now let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. But Margaret was beyond reason. Rational? There's nothing rational about abandoning your family. This is all her doing. She pointed an accusing finger at me. I felt a surge of anger. Stop blaming me for everything, Margaret. Your son is capable of making his own decisions. Sam put a hand on my arm, his touch steadying me. Mom, this isn't Abby's fault. We've both decided this is what's best for us. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but I could see the calculation behind them. Samuel, if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. You'll no longer be welcome in this house. I watched Sam's face, my heart in my throat. This was the moment of truth. To my relief and pride, Sam stood his ground. If that's how you feel, Mom, then I guess this is goodbye. As we turned to leave, Margaret's voice stopped us cold. Fine, go, but don't think you'll get away with this. That house belongs to us, remember? You'll have nothing. I froze, the implications of her words sinking in. We'd been paying the mortgage, but the deed was still in their name. How could I have forgotten that crucial detail? Sam's face paled. Mom, you wouldn't. Try me, she hissed. Robert stepped forward looking uncomfortable. Margaret, maybe we should. Stay out of this, Robert, she snapped. I felt a wave of desperation wash over me. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd built was slipping away, but I refused to let Margaret win. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Keep the house. We'll start over somewhere else. Sam looked at me, surprise and admiration in his eyes. Abby, are you sure? I nodded, squeezing his hand. We have each other. That's all that matters. As we packed our belongings, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Margaret alternated between icy silence and tearful pleas, while Robert hovered uncertainly in the background. Just as we were about to leave, Ellen appeared at the door. I heard raised voices, she said, concern etched on her face. Is everything okay? I felt a rush of gratitude for my friend. We're leaving, Ellen, for good. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She pulled me into a tight hug. You're doing the right thing, honey. Stay strong. As we loaded the last of our boxes into the car, I saw Robert approach Sam. They spoke in hushed tones, and I saw Sam nod gravely. What was that about? I asked as he slid into the driver's seat. Sam sighed. Dad slipped me some cash, said he was sorry about everything. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe not all family ties were severed. As we pulled out of the driveway, I saw Margaret watching from the window, her face a mask of anger and hurt. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt sad for her. We drove in silence for a while, the weight of what we'd done settling over us. Finally, Sam spoke. Where do we go from here, Abby? I took a deep breath, realizing I didn't have all the answers. We had no home, little money, and an uncertain future. But we had each other, and that gave me strength. I don't know exactly, I said, reaching for his hand, but we'll figure it out together. As we drove towards an unknown future, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. We'd taken a huge risk, but for the first time in years I felt truly free. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew we'd face them side by side. Little did I know, the biggest challenge was yet to come. The small apartment we'd rented felt claustrophobic as I paced back and forth, rehearsing the lines I'd prepared. Sam would be home any minute, and I had to make this convincing. My heart raced as I heard his key in the lock. Abby? Sam called out as he entered. I'm home. I took a deep breath and stepped into view, my face a mask of anger. We need to talk, Sam. He froze, sensing the tension in my voice. What's wrong? I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice trembling with feigned emotion. Living like this, cut off from your family, it's tearing me apart. Confusion flickered across Sam's face. But Abby, this was your idea. You wanted to leave. I know what I said, I snapped, internally wincing at the hurt in his eyes. But I was wrong. We've lost everything, Sam. Our home, our security, your family. Sam reached for me, but I stepped back. Abby, please, we can work this out. Just then, right on cue, Sam's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his face paling. It's Mom, I gestured sharply. Answer it. Put it on speaker. He hesitated, then complied. Margaret's voice filled the room, shrill and demanding. Samuel? Are you there? We need to talk about this ridiculous situation you've gotten yourself into. I watched Sam's face, seeing the conflict in his eyes. Mom, now's not a good time. Nonsense, Margaret interrupted. It's time you came to your senses and came home. You've made your point. Now it's time to stop this foolishness and remember where your loyalties lie. I saw Sam's resolve wavering, and for a moment I feared I'd pushed too far. But then he straightened his shoulders. Mom, I've told you. Abby and I made this decision together. We're not coming back. Margaret's voice turned cold. Is that her talking, or you? Because the Samuel I raised would never turn his back on his family like this. I stepped closer to the phone, my heart pounding. That's enough. Margaret, Sam can make his own decisions. You! Margaret hissed. I knew you were behind all this. You've poisoned my son against us. Well, let me tell you something, Abigail. You might think you've won, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The line went dead, leaving us in stunned silence. Sam turned to me, his face a mix of emotions. Abby, I'm so sorry. I never thought she'd go this far. I let my carefully constructed mask slip, revealing the fear and uncertainty beneath. What are we going to do, Sam? She's right. We've lost everything. He pulled me into his arms, and I felt a pang of guilt for my deception. We have each other, he murmured. That's all that matters. As I buried my face in his chest, I heard a sharp knock at the door. We froze, looking at each other in alarm. Sam? Abigail? Are you in there? It was Robert's voice, sounding urgent. Sam opened the door, revealing his father's worried face. Dad, what are you doing here? Robert stepped inside, his eyes darting between us. I had to warn you. Your mother, she's not thinking clearly. She's talking about contesting the mortgage payments, claiming you two were just tenants. She wants to take legal action. I felt the blood drain from my face. She can't do that. We paid for that house. Robert shook his head sadly. I'm afraid she can. The deed is still in our names. Sam's face hardened. This has gone too far. We need to stop her. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. You're right. It's time to end this, once and for all. As we huddled together, planning our next move, I realized that my staged falling out had taken on a life of its own. The lines between deception and reality had blurred, and now everything truly was at stake. I looked at Sam, seeing the determination in his eyes, and knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together. But as Robert filled us in on Margaret's plans, a chill ran down my spine. The real battle was just beginning, and I wasn't sure if we were ready for what lay ahead. The courtroom was silent as we waited for the judge to return with her decision. Sam's hand gripped mine tightly, his palms sweaty with nervous anticipation. Across the aisle, Margaret sat rigid, her eyes fixed straight ahead, while Robert slumped beside her, looking defeated. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Margaret had made good on her threats, contesting our claim to the house and accusing us of financial misconduct. But her plan had backfired spectacularly when Robert, pushed to his breaking point, had revealed years of Margaret's own financial deceit. As the judge re-entered the courtroom, I held my breath. This was it, the moment that would determine our future. In the matter of property ownership and financial claims, the judge began, her voice steady, I find in favor of Samuel and Abigail. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I felt Sam's arm wrap around me as relief washed over us both. The judge continued, Furthermore, given the evidence of financial misconduct presented by Mr. Robert Thompson, I am ordering a full audit of the family's finances. I watched as the color drained from Margaret's face. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly defeated. As we left the courthouse, Robert approached us hesitantly. Sam, Abigail, can we talk? We nodded, following him to a quiet corner. Robert's shoulders sagged as he turned to face us. I owe you both an apology, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have seen what Margaret was doing, how she was tearing this family apart. I was too weak, too afraid to stand up to her. Sam put a hand on his father's shoulder. It's okay, Dad. You did the right thing in the end. Robert shook his head. No, it's not okay, but I want to make it right. He turned to me, his eyes filled with remorse. Abigail, I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. Can you ever forgive me? I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Of course, Robert. Your family. As Robert pulled us both into a hug, I caught sight of Margaret over his shoulder. She stood alone, watching us with a mixture of anger and longing on her face. For a moment, I felt a twinge of pity. Then I remembered all the pain she'd caused, and I turned away. That evening, as Sam and I sat in our small apartment, surrounded by boxes ready for our move back into our rightful home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I have a confession to make, I said, turning to Sam, his eyebrows raised in question. That fight we had when your dad showed up, I staged it. I thought if I could make your mother show her true colors, you'd finally see how toxic she was. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. To my surprise, Sam laughed. Oh, Abby, he said, pulling me close. I knew. You knew? I gasped. But how? He smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Because I know you, and I love you, every clever, determined inch of you. As we sat there, planning our future free from Margaret's oppressive influence, I realized that we'd gained so much more than just a house. We'd reclaimed our independence, our self-respect, and our right to live life on our own terms. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But as I looked at Sam, I knew we could face anything together. So, I said, a smile playing on my lips, ready for our next adventure? Sam grinned, pulling me in for a kiss. With you? Always. As we sealed our promise with that kiss, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We'd weathered the storm, emerged stronger, and now, finally, we were free to write our own story. The future stretched out before us, full of possibility and hope, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us next. I stepped into the kitchen, my muscles still aching from a long day of personal training sessions. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, but the tension was even thicker. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, stood at the stove, her back rigid as she stirred a pot with unnecessary force. Jenna, dear, she said without turning around, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I hope you're not too tired to set the table. Eli works so hard, you know. I bit back a retort. Of course, Evelyn. Happy to help. As I reached for the plates, Evelyn sked. Not those, dear. The good china. We're not savages after all. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before responding. Right, the good china for a Wednesday night dinner. The front door opened, and Eli's voice called out, "I'm home!" "In here, darling," Evelyn chirped, her entire demeanor changing as her son entered the kitchen. Eli kissed his mother's cheek, then turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey, babe, how was your day?" Before I could answer, Evelyn interjected, "Oh, Eli, you must be exhausted. Sit down, let me get you a drink." I watched as my husband allowed himself to be fussed over, sinking into a chair at the table I'd just set. "Actually," I said, "I had a great day. I signed on 3 new clients and—" "That's nice, dear," Evelyn interrupted, placing a glass of whiskey in front of Eli. "But let's not bore Eli with talk of your little job. He's had such a long day at the office." Eli took a long sip of his drink, not meeting my eyes. I felt my jaw clench but forced a smile. "You're right, Evelyn. Eli, how was your day?" As Eli launched into a story about a big sale he'd closed, I busied myself helping Evelyn bring the food to the table. Just as we sat down to eat, Evelyn's phone buzzed. "Oh, excuse me," she said, glancing at the screen. "I need to take this. Start without me, dears." She stepped into the hallway, her voice dropping to a whisper. I couldn't make out most of what she was saying, but one phrase came through clear as day. "That gold digger thinks she's fooling us all." My fork clattered against my plate. Eli looked up, concern flashing across his face. "You okay, Jenna?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Evelyn returned moments later, all smiles. "So sorry about that. Now, where were we?" The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I pushed food around my plate, my appetite gone. As soon as it was polite, I excused myself to do the dishes. Standing at the sink, I could hear Evelyn and Eli talking in low voices in the living room. I strained to make out their words, but all I caught was Evelyn saying, "Need to protect our family's assets." My hands shook as I scrubbed a plate with unnecessary force. How had we gotten here? When Eli and I had decided to move in with Evelyn after his father's death, it had seemed like the right thing to do. She was lonely, and we could save money for our own place. But in the 3 months since, it felt like my entire world had shrunk to this suffocating house and Evelyn's constant criticism. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I wouldn't let Evelyn's words get to me. I wouldn't let her drive a wedge between Eli and me. We were a team, weren't we? As I dried my hands, I made a decision. I would talk to Eli tonight, lay everything out in the open. We'd find a way to make this work, to keep our family together, despite Evelyn's interference. But when I walked into our bedroom later that night, Eli was already asleep, his back turned to my side of the bed. I stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of his breathing, feeling more alone than ever. Tomorrow, I promised myself, we'd talk tomorrow, and somehow we'd find a way through this. We had to. I stared at the credit card statement in disbelief, my hands shaking. "Eli, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced up from his phone, looking annoyed. "What's what?" I thrust the paper at him. "This! A $5,000 watch? Designer suits? Eli, we can't afford this." He shrugged, turning back to his phone. "Relax, Jenna. I got a big commission last month. We're fine." "We're not fine," I insisted, feeling my frustration mount. "We're living with your mother because we're supposed to be saving money, remember?" Eli's eyes flashed. "Maybe if you contributed more to our finances, we wouldn't have to worry so much." The words hit me like a slap. "Excuse me, I work just as hard as you do." "Please," he scoffed. "Playing gym teacher to bored housewives isn't exactly bringing in the big bucks, is it?" Before I could respond, Evelyn glided into the room. "Is everything all right, dears?" I heard raised voices. Eli's demeanor changed instantly. "Everything's fine, Mom. Jenna's just a little stressed about money." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Oh, I thought you two were doing so well. Eli's been working so hard." I bit my tongue, knowing anything I said would be twisted. "It's nothing, Evelyn. Just a misunderstanding." She patted my arm condescendingly. "Don't worry, dear. I'm sure Eli will take care of everything. He always does." As she left, I turned back to Eli. "We need to talk about this. Seriously." He stood up, grabbing his keys. "Not now, Jenna. I'm meeting the guys for drinks." "Drinks?" I sputtered. "After what I just showed you?" He was already halfway out the door. "We'll talk later, okay?" The front door slammed, leaving me alone with my anger and frustration. I paced the living room, trying to calm down. This wasn't like Eli. He'd always been responsible with money before. What had changed? My eyes fell on a framed photo of Eli and his parents. Evelyn's smug smile seemed to mock me. Of course. She'd been pushing Eli to live up to his potential ever since we moved in. Apparently, that meant spending money we didn't have. The next morning, I cornered Eli before he left for work. "We need to talk about last night." He sighed, checking his watch. "Can't this wait? I'm running late." "No, it can't," I said firmly. "Eli, we're in serious trouble here. These credit card bills, the constant spending, it has to stop." He ran a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to say, Jenna?" I'm providing for us. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I want us to be partners," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "To make decisions together. This isn't you, Eli. What's really going on?" For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I married in his eyes. Then Evelyn's voice called from the kitchen. "Eli, darling, don't forget your lunch." Just like that, the moment was gone. Eli's face hardened. "I have to go. We'll talk about this later." But we didn't. Days passed, and Eli avoided any serious conversation. The credit card bills kept coming, each one worse than the last. I felt like I was drowning, watching helplessly as our future slipped away. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted Eli one night after dinner, while Evelyn was out at her book club. "This has to stop," I said, laying out all the bills on the coffee table. "We're drowning in debt, Eli. And for what? To impress your mother?" His face flushed with anger. "Don't bring my mother into this. She has nothing to do with it." "She has everything to do with it," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. "Ever since we moved in, you've been different, reckless, irresponsible. This isn't you, Eli. What happened to our plans, our future?" For a long moment, he was silent. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, "Maybe our plans have changed. Maybe this is who I really am, Jenna. Did you ever think of that?" I stared at him, feeling as if I was looking at a stranger. "If that's true," I said quietly, "then I don't know who you are anymore." As I turned to leave the room, I heard him mutter, "Maybe you never did." I paused in the doorway, my heart breaking. How had we come to this? And more importantly, where do we go from here? I took a deep breath, steeling myself before knocking on Evelyn's bedroom door. It was time to address this mess head on. "Come in," she called, her voice syrupy sweet. I stepped inside, finding Evelyn at her vanity, applying lipstick with practiced precision. "Evelyn, we need to talk about the family finances." She raised an eyebrow, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Oh? And what would you know about our family finances, dear?" I bit back a retort, reminding myself to stay calm. "I've seen the credit card statements, Evelyn. The spending is out of control. We need to rein it in before." "We?" she interrupted, swiveling to face me. "There is no we when it comes to this family's money, Jenna. That's between Eli and me." "I'm Eli's wife," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "His finances are my finances." Evelyn's laugh was cold and brittle. "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you, to get your hands on our family's hard-earned money?" "That's not what this is about," I insisted. "We're drowning in debt, Evelyn. Can't you see that?" She stood, her eyes flashing with anger. "What I see is a gold digger trying to control my son. Eli knows what he's doing. He's a Bradshaw, after all." "Being a Bradshaw doesn't make him immune to financial ruin," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. Evelyn's hand connected with my cheek before I could react. The slap echoed in the sudden silence. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Get out of my room! Get out of my house!" I stumbled backward, my hand on my stinging cheek. "This is my house, too," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Evelyn advanced on me, her face twisted with rage. "This will never be your house. You'll never be a true Bradshaw. Eli will see that soon enough." I fled the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart raced as I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. This was worse than I'd imagined. How had things spiraled so far out of control? That night, I lay awake long after Eli had fallen asleep. His soft snores felt like a betrayal. How could he sleep so peacefully while our world was crumbling? The next morning, I made a decision. If Eli and Evelyn wouldn't listen to reason, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. I made an appointment with a financial advisor, gathering every scrap of financial information I could find. As I sat in the sleek office, laying out our dire situation, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. "Mrs. Bradshaw," the advisor said, her face grave, I won't sugarcoat this. Your financial situation is precarious at best. I nodded, unsurprised. What can we do? She outlined a strict budget, debt consolidation plans, and potential lifestyle changes. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a path forward. Armed with this information, I returned home, ready to confront Eli and Evelyn once and for all. But as I walked through the front door, I froze. Eli and Evelyn sat in the living room, their faces somber. Between them on the coffee table lay a stack of papers. "Jenna," Eli said, his voice oddly flat. "We need to talk." Evelyn's smile was triumphant as she pushed the papers towards me. "It's time to face facts, dear. This marriage isn't working." My hands shook as I picked up the top sheet. Divorce papers, already signed by Eli. I looked at my husband, searching for any sign of the man I'd married. "Eli, what is this?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Jenna. Mom's right. This just isn't working anymore." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "You're choosing her over me? Over us?" Eli's silence was all the answer I needed. Evelyn stood, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. "It's for the best, dear. You'll see that in time." I stared at them, this united front against me. In that moment, something inside me hardened. "You want a divorce?" I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Fine, you'll get one. But don't think for a second this is over." I turned and walked out, leaving them stunned in my wake. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of despair and determination. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I'd fight for myself, and only myself. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers before me. The house was eerily quiet. Eli had left for work, and Evelyn was at her weekly bridge game. It was just me and this stack of papers that represented the end of my marriage. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen. Was I really going to do this? Sign away 5 years of my life without a fight? A memory flashed through my mind. Eli and me on our wedding day, full of hope and dreams for our future. What had happened to those two people? The front door opened, startling me. Eli walked in, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. "Jenna," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I gestured to the papers. "I think everything's been said, don't you?" He sat across from me, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry, I never meant for things to get this bad." "Then why did you sign these?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. Eli ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, she convinced me it was for the best. Said you were only after our money, that you'd leave me once you got what you wanted." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "And you believed her, after everything we've been through together?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted, "but I do know I still love you, Jenna." For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Then I remembered the cold calculation in Evelyn's eyes when she handed me these papers. "If you love me, why didn't you stand up to your mother? Why didn't you fight for us?" Eli's silence was deafening. I stood up, suddenly furious. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done being the only one fighting for this marriage. I'm done being treated like an intruder in my own home." I grabbed the pen and scrawled my signature across the bottom of the divorce papers. "There. You're free now, Eli. Free to be the son your mother always wanted." Eli's face crumpled. "Jenna, please. We can work this out." But I was beyond listening. I stormed upstairs and started throwing clothes into a suitcase. Eli followed, pleading with me to stay, to talk things through. His words washed over me, meaningless after months of neglect and betrayal. As I zipped up my suitcase, Evelyn's voice rang out from downstairs. "Eli? Darling, are you home early?" Eli's face paled. "Mom, wait." But Evelyn was already in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. Her eyes narrowed as they landed on my suitcase. "What's going on here?" I shouldered past her, dragging my suitcase behind me. "Congratulations, Evelyn. You got what you wanted. I'm leaving." Evelyn's triumphant smile made my blood boil. "It's for the best, dear. You'll see that in time." I whirled to face her. "No, Evelyn. What I see is a bitter, manipulative woman who can't stand the thought of her son having a life outside of her control. And you," I turned to Eli, who looked shell-shocked. "You're so weak you can't even stand up to your own mother." Evelyn gasped. "How dare you?" "No, how dare you?" I interrupted. "You've torn apart a marriage because of your own insecurities. I hope you're happy together." I stormed down the stairs, my heart pounding. As I reached for the front door, Eli's hand caught my arm. "Jenna, please," he begged. Don't go, we can fix this. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I'd fallen in love with, but all I saw was a reflection of Evelyn's manipulations. It's too late, Eli, I said softly. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I pulled away from him and walked out the door, leaving behind the suffocating world of the Bradshaws. As I threw my suitcase into the trunk of my car, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. As I drove away, I made a silent vow to myself. I would rebuild my life on my terms, and I would never again let anyone make me feel small or unworthy. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was finally free. 6 months after walking out of Eli and Evelyn's lives, I stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. Gone was the timid, self-doubting Jenna who had let herself be pushed around. In her place stood a confident, successful business owner. My personal training business had taken off, and I'd just signed the lease on my own studio space. Life was good, or at least it was getting there. The sharp trill of my phone cut through my thoughts. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Jenna? Eli's voice, ragged and desperate, filled the line. I need your help. I gripped the phone tighter. Eli, what's wrong? Everything, he choked out. The business, it's gone. I'm in trouble, Jenna, serious trouble. My heart raced. Despite everything, a part of me still cared. What kind of trouble? Financial, legal. I made some bad decisions. Mom's furious. She's cut me off completely. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to rush to his rescue. I'm sorry to hear that, Eli, but I don't see how I can help. Please, he begged. Just, can we meet? I need to explain in person. Against my better judgment, I agreed. An hour later, I sat across from Eli in a quiet cafe. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his designer clothes rumpled and stained. I messed up, Jenna, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. After you left, I threw myself into work, made some risky investments, used company money to cover personal debts. I felt sick. How bad is it? Bad enough that I might go to jail. He reached across the table, grabbing my hand. I need money, Jenna, to pay back what I took, to hire a good lawyer. You're the only one I can turn to. I pulled my hand away, shock turning to anger. You're unbelievable, you know that? You throw me away like I'm nothing, and now you want me to bail you out? I know I don't deserve it, he said, tears in his eyes. But I'm desperate. Mom won't help. She says I've brought shame on the family name. A bitter laugh escaped me. And what about me, Eli? What about the shame and humiliation you put me through? He hung his head. I'm sorry. I was weak. I let Mom manipulate me. I see that now. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered the coldness in his when he'd handed me those divorce papers. No, I said, my voice firm. I won't help you, Eli. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. I stood to leave, but his next words stopped me cold. If you don't help me, I'll have to drag you into this, he said, desperation making his voice ugly. We were still married when some of this happened. You could be implicated too. I stared at him, disbelief turning to fury. Are you threatening me? He backpedaled quickly. No. I don't know what else to do. In that moment, I saw Eli clearly for the first time. Not as the charming man I'd fallen in love with or the weak-willed son Evelyn had molded, but as a desperate, cornered animal willing to do anything to save himself. Goodbye, Eli, I said, my voice cold. Don't contact me again. As I walked out of the cafe, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my lawyer, confirming our appointment to discuss finalizing the divorce. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I'd worked too hard to let Eli drag me back to his mess. It was time to cut all ties, once and for all. But as I drove home, doubt crept in. What if Eli wasn't bluffing? Could I really be implicated in his financial misdeeds? And more importantly, was I strong enough to stand my ground if he came after me? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, determination setting in. I'd fought too hard for my independence to give it up now. Whatever Eli threw at me, I'd face it head on. It was time to show the Bradshaws and myself just how strong I'd become. I stood outside the imposing Bradshaw mansion, my heart pounding. It had been months since I'd last seen this place, but today I wasn't here as the meek daughter-in-law. I was here to demand what was rightfully mine. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. Moments later, Evelyn answered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Jenna, what are you doing here?" I pushed past her into the foyer. "Where's Eli? We need to talk." Evelyn's face hardened. "Eli's not here, and you're not welcome." "Save it, Evelyn," I interrupted. "I know about the debts. I know about everything." Her composure slipped for a moment before she regained control. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "Eli's been using my name on loan applications. Did you know that? Or did you conveniently overlook it when you were pushing him to spend beyond his means?" Evelyn's face paled. "That's ridiculous. Eli would never." "But he did," I said, pulling out a stack of papers from my bag. "And now I'm on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that you two racked up." Just then, Eli stumbled into the room looking disheveled and hungover. "Jenna, what's going on?" I turned to face him, my anger reaching a boiling point. "What's going on is that you've royally screwed us both, Eli. Did you think I wouldn't find out about the loans? The credit cards?" Eli's face crumpled. I was going to tell you. I just needed more time." "Time for what?" I demanded. "To dig us into an even deeper hole?" Evelyn stepped between us. "Now let's all calm down. I'm sure we can work this out like adults." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, now you want to be reasonable? Where was this attitude when you were poisoning Eli against me? When you were pushing him to spend money we didn't have?" "I was only trying to protect our family," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Protect?" I spat. "You've destroyed it. And now you're both going to make this right." I laid out my demands. Eli would take full responsibility for the debts, clearing my name from all financial obligations. In return, I wouldn't press charges for fraud. Eli nodded meekly, but Evelyn bristled. "You can't do this. We'll fight you every step of the way." "Go ahead," I challenged. "I have nothing left to lose. But your precious family name will be dragged through the mud. Is that what you want, Evelyn?" For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She turned to Eli. "Don't listen to her. We can find another way." But Eli shook his head. "No, Mom. Jenna's right. I messed up. Big time. It's time I faced the consequences." Evelyn's face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you? You ungrateful." "Enough," I shouted, silencing them both. "Here's what's going to happen. Eli, you're going to sign these papers taking full responsibility for the debts. Evelyn, you're going to use your connections to help clear my name. And then I never want to hear from either of you again. Are we clear?" The silence that followed was deafening. Eli nodded slowly, reaching for the pen. But as he was about to sign, Evelyn made a last, desperate move. "Wait," she cried. What if we offered you money to make this all go away?" I stared at her, disbelief turning to disgust. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. It's about doing what's right." With shaking hands, Eli signed the papers. As I gathered them up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. But the battle wasn't over yet. I turned to leave, but Evelyn's voice stopped me. "This isn't over, Jenna. You'll regret this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Evelyn. The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner." As I walked out of the Bradshaw mansion for the last time, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The papers were signed, but would Eli and Evelyn follow through? Or was this just the beginning of an even bigger fight? I squared my shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. I'd found my strength, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away from me again. I stood behind the counter of my newly opened fitness studio, surveying the bustling space with a sense of pride. Months of hard work had paid off, and my business was thriving. As I watched a group of women laughing during their cool-down stretches, I felt a warmth in my chest. This was what success felt like. The bell above the door chimed, and I froze. Evelyn Bradshaw stood in the entrance, looking as polished and imperious as ever. "Jenna, dear," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "What a lovely little gym you have here." I steeled myself, forcing a neutral expression. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" She glided towards me, her eyes scanning the room. "Can't a mother-in-law visit? We have so much to discuss." "Ex-mother-in-law," I corrected. "And we have nothing to discuss. The divorce is final." Evelyn's smile tightened. "About that, I think we may have been hasty in our judgments." I raised an eyebrow. "We? Eli misses you terribly," she continued, ignoring my interruption. "And I've come to see that perhaps I was mistaken about you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mistaken? You tried to destroy me, Evelyn. You and Eli both." She waved a hand dismissively. Water under the bridge, dear. The important thing is we want you back in the family. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. You can't be serious. I'm always serious when it comes to family, Evelyn said, her eyes glinting. And let's be honest, Jenna, you've done well for yourself, but wouldn't you rather have the Bradshaw name and fortune behind you again? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This isn't about reconciliation. This is about money. Evelyn's mask slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of desperation. The family business is struggling. Eli's missteps have cost us dearly, but with your success, your connections in the fitness world. You want to use me to save your family's reputation, I said, disgust rising in my throat. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement, Evelyn pressed. You'd have everything you ever wanted, the wealth, the status, the family. For a split second I faltered. The idea of never having to worry about money again was tempting. But then I remembered the endless nights of tears, the constant belittling, the betrayal. No, I said, my voice firm. I don't want any of that. Not anymore. Evelyn's face hardened. Don't be a fool, Jenna. You'll never have an opportunity like this again. Good, I shot back, because I don't need your money or your name. I've built something for myself, something real, and I won't let you take that away from me. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a hiss. You ungrateful little gold digger. You think you can turn your back on the Bradshaws? We made you. I stood my ground, meeting her gaze. No, Evelyn, you tried to break me, but I remade myself. The bell chimed again, and Eli walked in, looking sheepish. Mom, what's going on? I turned to him, my resolve strengthening. Your mother was just leaving, and so are you. Eli's face fell. Jenna, please, we can work this out. I've changed, I swear. It's too late, I said, my voice steady. I've moved on, and it's time you both did too. Evelyn grabbed Eli's arm, her face a mask of fury. Come, Eli, we don't need her. We'll find another way. As they stormed out, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd faced my demons and come out stronger. But as I turned back to my studio, a nagging doubt crept in. Would the Bradshaws really let this go? Or was this just the calm before an even bigger storm? I shook off the thought, focusing on the women still working out, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. Whatever came next, I was ready. I'd fought too hard for my independence to let anyone take it away now. As I rejoined my class, guiding them through their final stretches, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in years, I was truly free. And no amount of money or status could ever compare to that feeling. I sat in my doctor's office, staring at the ultrasound image in my hands. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind, filling me with a mixture of joy and trepidation. As I walked out into the bright sunlight, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Bradshaw family empire crumbles. CEO Eli Bradshaw arrested for fraud. My heart raced as I clicked on the article. There, in stark black and white, was the story of Eli and Evelyn's downfall. The family business had collapsed under the weight of Eli's mismanagement and fraudulent activities. Evelyn, it seemed, had suffered a stress-induced stroke and was now in a long-term care facility. A part of me felt a twisted satisfaction. Wasn't this what I had wanted? To see them suffer as I had? But as I placed a hand on my still flat stomach, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This wasn't justice. It was tragedy. My phone rang, startling me. It was Eli. Jenna. His voice was broken, desperate. I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. Mom's medical bills, the legal fees. I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, torn between compassion and self-preservation. I'm sorry, Eli, but I can't get involved, not anymore. Please, he begged. You're the only one who ever truly cared about us, about me. The old Jenna would have caved, would have rushed to his rescue, but I wasn't that woman anymore. No, Eli, I said firmly. You're right. I did care, but you and Evelyn threw that away. I've moved on, and it's time you did too. As I ended the call, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For so long I had carried the burden of their expectations, their judgments, but now I was free. I walked to the park near my apartment, settling on a bench to watch children play. My hand rested on my stomach, and I thought about the future stretching out before me, a future I had built for myself, brick by brick. Is this seat taken? I looked up to see Mark, my neighbor and friend, smiling down at me. Over the past few months, he had become a constant source of support and laughter in my life. "It's all yours," I said, patting the spot next to me. As he sat down, I felt a flutter in my chest that had nothing to do with morning sickness. "Mark, I have something to tell you." His eyes met mine, warm and understanding. "I'm listening." Taking a deep breath, I shared my news. To my surprise and delight, his face lit up with joy. "Jenna, that's wonderful," he exclaimed, taking my hand in his. I know we haven't talked about where this is going, but I want you to know I'm here for you, for both of you if you'll have me." Tears welled up in my eyes as I squeezed his hand. "I'd like that, very much." As we sat there planning and dreaming, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the struggle to find myself again. But also the strength I had discovered, the resilience I had built. The Bradshaws' world might have crumbled, but mine was just beginning to bloom. And as I looked at Mark, at the future we might build together, I realized that true wealth had nothing to do with money or status. It was about love, trust, and the family we choose for ourselves. My phone buzzed again. Another news alert about the Bradshaws' downfall. But this time, I ignored it. Their story was no longer mine to carry. I had my own story to write now, a new chapter filled with hope and possibility. As Mark and I left the park hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past was behind me, and the future, full of promise, lay ahead. Whatever challenges came next, I knew I had the strength to face them. Not as Jenna Bradshaw, the scorned wife, but as Jenna, the woman who had reclaimed her life and found her own path to happiness. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. I smoothed my skirt and took a deep breath, steeling myself for another one of Cecilia's impromptu visits. The doorbell chimed, and I plastered on a smile before opening the door. "Laura, thank goodness you're home." Cecilia burst in, her designer purse swinging wildly. "I'm in such a pickle, and I didn't know who else to turn to." I bit back a sigh. "What's wrong this time, Cecilia?" She collapsed dramatically onto my couch. "It's the mortgage. I'm behind again, and they're threatening foreclosure. I just need a little help to tide me over." I perched on the edge of an armchair, my patience wearing thin. "Cecilia, we've been through this before. Ethan and I can't keep bailing you out." "But your family?" she wailed. "What am I supposed to do?" Before I could respond, my cell phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a wave of relief. "I'm sorry, Cecilia, but I need to take this. It's my father." I stepped into the kitchen, grateful for the interruption. "Hi, Dad. How are you feeling?" "Laura, sweetheart." My father's voice was uncharacteristically serious. "I need you to come over. There's something important we need to discuss." A chill ran down my spine. "Is everything okay?" "Just come as soon as you can," he said, then hung up. I returned to the living room, where Cecilia was rifling through her purse. "I'm sorry, but I have to go. My father needs me." Cecilia's head snapped up. "But what about my situation?" "We'll talk later," I said firmly, ushering her towards the door. "I really have to go." As I drove to my father's house, my mind raced. What could be so urgent? Dad had always been the picture of health, but lately he'd seemed more tired than usual. I pulled into the driveway and hurried inside. "Dad, where are you?" "In here, Laura," he called from the study. I found him sitting behind his desk, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "What's going on, Dad? You're scaring me." He gestured for me to sit. "I'm afraid I have some bad news, sweetheart. I've been to see Dr. Jameson, and, well, it's not good." My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "I have cancer, Laura, and it's advanced. They're giving me 6 months, maybe a year." The world tilted on its axis. "No," I whispered. "There must be some mistake. We'll get a second opinion, try different treatments." Dad reached across the desk and took my hand. "I've already done all that. It's time to face facts. But that's not why I called you here." I blinked back tears. "What do you mean?" He pulled out a thick folder. "I need to get my affairs in order, and there are some things you need to know. I've made some investments over the years, properties and such. I want to make sure you're taken care of after I'm gone." "Dad, stop," I pleaded. "I don't want to talk about this." "We have to, Laura. You need to be prepared." As he started explaining about bank accounts and real estate holdings, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Where are you? Cecilia's upset. What happened?" I ignored it, trying to focus on my father's words. But my mind was reeling. How could this be happening? And how was I going to tell Ethan? Dad must have sensed my distraction. We can go over the details later. For now, just know that everything's taken care of. You won't have to worry. I nodded numbly, still struggling to process it all. As I stood to leave, Dad pulled me into a tight hug. We'll get through this, sweetheart, he murmured. Together. I clung to him, wishing I could freeze this moment and make time stand still. But as I pulled away, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Driving home, I felt like I was in a fog. How could I face Ethan and Cecilia with this news? How could I face anyone? As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Cecilia's car still parked out front. My heart sank. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for any of it. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked towards the house, bracing myself for whatever came next. The day of Dad's funeral dawned gray and somber, matching my mood perfectly. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress, when Ethan appeared behind me. "You ready?" he asked, his hand on my shoulder. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we drove to the church, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The service was a blur of tears and whispered condolences. I barely registered the words of the eulogy, focusing instead on the framed photo of Dad next to his casket. He looked so alive, so vibrant. How could he be gone? As we gathered at the cemetery, Cecilia sidled up to me. "Laura, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "Your father was such a generous man. I'm sure he made sure you were well taken care of." I stiffened, shocked by her brazenness. Before I could respond, Ethan pulled me away. "Not now," he muttered. Back at the house, I retreated to Dad's study, needing a moment alone. I ran my fingers over his desk, remembering our last conversation. The folder he'd shown me was still there, tucked away in a drawer. A knock at the door startled me. It was Mr. Jameson, Dad's lawyer. "Laura, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are some matters we need to discuss," he said gently. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "What is it?" He pulled out a thick envelope. "Your father's will." He was very specific about his wishes. As Mr. Jameson began reading, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Dad had left me everything. The house, his savings, even a few properties I didn't know he owned. "There's one more thing," Mr. Jameson said, handing me a sealed letter. "Your father wanted you to have this privately." I took it with trembling hands, but before I could open it, the door burst open. Ethan and Cecilia stood there, their eyes wide. "What's going on?" Ethan demanded. Mr. Jameson stood. "I was just going over Harold's will with Laura, if you'll excuse us." "No," Cecilia interrupted. "We're family. We should hear this too." I felt a surge of anger. "This is private, Cecilia. Please leave." Ethan stepped forward. "Laura, don't you think we should discuss this as a family? After all, what affects you affects me too." I stared at him, suddenly seeing him in a new light. "What exactly are you implying, Ethan?" Before he could answer, Cecilia chimed in. "We're just concerned, Laura. You've been through so much. You shouldn't have to deal with all this alone." I stood up, clutching Dad's letter to my chest. "I'm not alone. I have my father's memory and his wishes to guide me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need some time to myself." I brushed past them, ignoring their protests. In the sanctuary of my bedroom, I finally opened Dad's letter with shaking hands. "My dearest Laura," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I want you to know that I've made arrangements to protect you and your inheritance. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." Tears blurred my vision as I read on. Dad had suspected that Ethan and Cecilia might try to take advantage of the situation. He'd set up trusts and legal safeguards to ensure that his legacy remained mine alone. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Laura?" It was Ethan. "We need to talk about the will." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. As I reached for the doorknob, I realized that the battle for my father's legacy and my own future was just beginning. "Coming," I called out, tucking the letter safely away. Whatever happened next, I knew I had to stay strong, for Dad and for myself. The incessant ringing of the doorbell jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m.? Who could it be at this hour? Ethan was already gone, having left early for a business meeting. I threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, only to find Cecilia on my doorstep, looking frazzled. "Laura, thank goodness you're home," she exclaimed, barging past me. "I'm in dire straits. The bank is threatening to repossess my car." I sighed, closing the door. Cecilia, it's barely morning. Couldn't this wait? She whirled around, eyes wide. Wait, Laura, I could lose my car today. I need your help. Just a small loan to tide me over. The audacity of her request so soon after Dad's funeral made my blood boil. Cecilia, I'm still grieving. I can't deal with your financial problems right now. But you have all that money now, she pressed. Surely you can spare some for family? I felt a surge of anger. That's enough. My inheritance is not your personal piggy bank. I think you should leave. Cecilia's face hardened. I see how it is. You get a windfall and suddenly you're too good for family. Ethan will hear about this. As I watched her storm out, I realized the peace I'd hoped for after Dad's passing was slipping further away. Later that afternoon, as I sorted through Dad's belongings, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my old high school announcing an upcoming reunion. I hesitated, then decided to RSVP. Maybe a night out would do me good. Just then, Ethan walked in, looking tired. Hey, he said, kissing my cheek. How was your day? I debated whether to mention Cecilia's visit, but decided against it. Fine, just going through some of Dad's things. How was your meeting? He shrugged, loosening his tie. Same old, same old. Listen, I was thinking we should talk about the inheritance. Maybe consider investing some of it. I felt my guard go up. I'm not ready to make any decisions yet, Ethan. It's too soon. He frowned. Laura, we can't just sit on that kind of money. We need to be smart about this. I echoed. Dad left it to me, Ethan. I'll decide what to do with it when I'm ready. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. We'll discuss this later. I have to take this call. As he hurried out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why was he so interested in my inheritance? The next morning, I woke to find Ethan already gone again. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight. Feeling restless, I decided to visit one of the properties Dad had left me, a small apartment building across town. As I pulled up, I noticed a familiar car parked outside. Cecilia's. Confused, I made my way to the building's office. The door was ajar, and I could hear voices inside. She's being so stubborn, Cecilia was saying. We need to find a way to convince her to share the inheritance. Patience, a male voice replied. It took me a moment to recognize it as Ethan's. We'll get what's ours. Just stick to the plan. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. Ethan and Cecilia were plotting against me? How long had this been going on? As I turned to leave, my foot caught on a loose floorboard. The resulting creak seemed to echo through the hallway. Did you hear that? Cecilia's voice was sharp with alarm. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall. Footsteps approached the door. Hello? Ethan called out. Is someone there? My heart pounding, I realized I had a choice to make. Confront them now, or retreat and plan my next move carefully. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. I smoothed my dress nervously as I entered the high school gymnasium. The reunion was in full swing, a sea of familiar yet changed faces. I'd come here hoping for a distraction from the mess at home, but now I felt overwhelmed. Laura? Laura Thompson, is that you? I turned to see a vaguely familiar face. It's Laura Prescott now, but yes, I'm sorry, I don't. Peter Caldwell, he said, grinning widely. We had chemistry together. Well, the class, not, you know. I forced a polite smile, memories flooding back. Peter had always been a bit intense. Of course, Peter. How are you? Oh, I'm great, he said, edging closer. But wow, look at you. You haven't aged a day. I took a step back, feeling uncomfortable. That's kind of you to say. If you'll excuse me, I need to. Wait, Peter said, grabbing my arm. I've always regretted not telling you how I felt back then. I had such a crush on you, Laura. I gently but firmly removed his hand. Peter, that was a long time ago. I'm married now. His eyes narrowed. Married? To who? Ethan Prescott, I said, scanning the room for an escape route. Peter's face darkened. Prescott? As in Cecilia Prescott's brother? I froze. You know Cecilia? He laughed bitterly. Oh, I know her all right. She's been stringing me along for months, always needing favors, but now I see what's really going on. My heart raced. What do you mean? Peter leaned in, his breath hot on my ear. Your husband and his sister are planning something, Laura, and it involves you. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. You're lying. Why should I believe you? Because I can prove it, he said, pulling out his phone. Cecilia's been careless, left some interesting texts on my phone when she borrowed it. With shaking hands, I took the phone. What I saw made my blood run cold. Messages between Cecilia and Ethan discussing ways to access my inheritance, plans to manipulate me to push me to make rash decisions. "This can't be real," I whispered. Peter's eyes gleamed with a mix of sympathy and something else. Excitement? "Oh, it's real, all right. And there's more where that came from." I handed the phone back, feeling sick. "Why are you showing me this?" He shrugged. "Maybe I still have a soft spot for you, or maybe I'm just tired of being Cecilia's puppet. Either way, you deserve to know." I nodded numbly, my mind racing. What was I going to do with this information? Peter touched my arm again. "Listen, Laura, I can help you. We could team up, get back at them both. What do you say?" I stared at him, suddenly seeing the situation clearly. Peter wasn't my savior, he was just another player in this twisted game, but he had given me valuable information, whether he meant to or not. "Thank you for telling me, Peter," I said carefully, "but I need to handle this on my own." His face fell. "But Laura—" "No," I said firmly, "this is my fight. Please don't contact me again." As I walked away, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Where are you? We need to talk about the inheritance. It's important." I took a deep breath, making a decision. It was time to stop reacting and start taking control. I would play along for now, gather more evidence. And then, when the time was right, I would confront them all. I texted back, on my way home. "You're right. We have a lot to discuss." As I left the reunion, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The game had changed, and now I knew the rules. It was time to start playing to win. I stepped out of my office building, exhausted after a long day of work. As I fumbled for my car keys, a familiar voice made me freeze. "Laura, fancy seeing you here." I turned slowly, my heart sinking. Peter stood there, grinning as if we were old friends. "Peter, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged, stepping closer. "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd say hi." "How did you know where I work?" I demanded, alarm bells ringing in my head. "Oh, I have my ways," he said with a wink. "Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation at the reunion. I really think we should talk more about Ethan and Cecilia." I backed away, clutching my purse tightly. "I told you, I'm handling it myself. Please leave me alone." His face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Laura. You need me." Before I could respond, a coworker walked by, giving us a curious look. I forced a smile and turned back to Peter. "I have to go. Don't come here again." As I drove home, my mind raced. How had Peter found me, and what would he do next? The next morning, I woke to find Ethan already gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter. "Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight." I sighed, realizing how common these early meetings had become. As I sipped my coffee, movement outside caught my eye. I peered through the window and nearly dropped my mug. Peter was standing across the street, staring at our house. My hands shaking, I called Ethan. It went straight to voicemail. "Ethan, call me as soon as you get this. It's urgent." I paced the living room, debating what to do. Should I call the police? But what would I say? That my husband's sister's ex-boyfriend was stalking me because of some convoluted inheritance scheme? A knock at the door made me jump. I approached cautiously, relief washing over me when I saw it was just the mailman. But as I opened the door, Peter appeared behind him. "Special delivery," Peter said with a smirk, pushing past me into the house. "Get out!" I shouted, reaching for my phone. "I'm calling the police." Peter held up his hands. "Wait, I have proof of what Ethan and Cecilia are planning. Real proof this time." Despite my better judgment, I hesitated. "What are you talking about?" He pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's on here. Bank statements, emails, recorded conversations. They're planning to have you declared mentally unfit, Laura, to take control of your inheritance." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible. Ethan wouldn't." "See for yourself," Peter said, offering me the drive. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Just then, I heard a key in the lock. Ethan's voice called out, "Laura, whose car is that out front?" Peter's eyes widened. He shoved the USB drive into my hand and bolted for the back door. I quickly slipped the drive into my pocket as Ethan entered. "Laura, what's going on?" Ethan asked, looking around suspiciously. I took a deep breath, making a split-second decision. "Nothing, honey. Just got a bit of a fright from a door-to-door salesman. Everything's fine." Ethan relaxed slightly, but I could see doubt in his eyes. All right. Listen, I was thinking we should have dinner with Cecilia tonight to discuss some family matters. I nodded, my mind racing. Sure, that sounds great. As Ethan headed upstairs to change, I clutched the USB drive in my pocket. I had a choice to make. Trust Peter's evidence and confront Ethan and Cecilia? Or play along and try to uncover the truth myself? One thing was certain, tonight's dinner would change everything. And I had to be ready. The doorbell rang, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Cecilia's visit was no surprise. Ethan had arranged this family dinner after all. But the tension in the air was palpable as I opened the door. "Laura, darling," Cecilia exclaimed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She breezed past me, Ethan following close behind. As we settled in the living room, I couldn't help but notice the furtive glances Ethan and Cecilia exchanged. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, feeling the outline of the USB drive Peter had given me. "So, Laura," Cecilia began, her voice sickly sweet, "how have you been coping? It must be so difficult, dealing with your grief and all this newfound responsibility." I forced a smile. "I'm managing, thank you. Dad prepared me well." Ethan cleared his throat. "Speaking of which, Laura, we really need to discuss the inheritance. I've been thinking." "Actually," I interrupted, my heart racing, "I have something I'd like to discuss first." They both stared at me, surprise evident on their faces. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone, bringing up the photos Peter had sent me. Pictures of Ethan and Cecilia meeting in secret, looking far too cozy. "Care to explain these?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The color drained from Ethan's face. Cecilia let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, those? That's nothing, just a family meeting." "Stop lying," I snapped. "I know what you've been planning, trying to have me declared mentally unfit? Really?" Ethan stood up, his face a mask of anger. "Where did you get those photos? Have you been spying on us?" "That's rich, coming from you," I retorted. "I'm not the one plotting behind my spouse's back." Cecilia's demeanor changed in an instant. "You ungrateful bitch," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean constantly begging for money? Trying to manipulate me out of my inheritance?" Ethan stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "You have no idea what you're talking about. We were trying to protect you, to make sure you didn't squander everything your father left you." "By having me declared incompetent?" I shot back. "Some protection." Suddenly Ethan's expression shifted. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "You want to play hardball, Laura? Fine, let's talk about your little rendezvous with Peter." My blood ran cold. "What?" He pulled out his phone, showing me a series of photos. Peter and me at the reunion, outside my office, even at our front door. "Looks like I'm not the only one with secrets," Ethan sneered. "That's not what it looks like," I stammered. "Peter's been stalking me. I was trying to handle it on my own." "Save it," Cecilia interjected. "We have all the evidence we need. How do you think it'll look to a judge when we show them these? A grieving widow, acting erratically, meeting strange men." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. They'd set me up. Peter, the photos, the USB drive, it was all part of their plan. "You won't get away with this," I said, my voice shaking. Ethan's laugh was cold. "We already have. Face it, Laura. You're out of your depth. Sign over control of the inheritance now, and we can avoid a messy public legal battle." I looked between them. These people I'd once considered family, now revealed as vultures circling their prey. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever. But then I remembered my father's words from his letter. "Trust your instincts, sweetheart. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." I straightened my spine, meeting their gazes head-on. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "This ends now, but not the way you think." I pulled out the USB drive, holding it up. "You're not the only ones with evidence, and unlike your fabricated photos, what's on here is real. So here's what's going to happen." As I laid out my terms, I saw the confidence drain from their faces. The game had changed, and for the first time I held all the cards. The battle for my father's legacy and my own future had reached its tipping point, and I was ready to fight. The morning after my confrontation with Ethan and Cecilia, I woke to an empty house and a text message from an unknown number. "Meet me at Riverside Park, 1 p.m. Come alone, Peter." My instincts screamed danger, but I knew I needed answers. I arrived at the park early, scanning the area for any sign of Ethan or Cecilia. Peter was already there, pacing nervously by the fountain. "Laura," he called out, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I kept my distance, eyeing him warily. "Start talking, Peter. What's your role in all this?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry, Laura. I never meant for it to go this far. Cecilia, she blackmailed me. Said she'd ruin me if I didn't help set you up. Why should I believe you?" I demanded. Peter pulled out his phone. "Because I recorded everything, every conversation, every plan they made. I couldn't go through with it anymore." As he played the recordings, my world tilted on its axis. Ethan's voice, cold and calculating, discussing ways to manipulate me. Cecilia, gleefully planning how they'd spend my inheritance once I was out of the picture. "Oh, God," I whispered, feeling sick. "How long has this been going on?" "Months," Peter admitted. "Since before your father passed. They've been planning this for a long time, Laura." I sank onto a nearby bench, my mind reeling. "Why come clean now?" Peter sat beside me, keeping a respectful distance, because I realized how wrong it was, and because I really did have feelings for you back in school. I couldn't be part of destroying your life. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Where are you? We need to talk. Come home now." I showed Peter the message, my heart racing. "What do I do?" He hesitated, then said, "Go. Act like nothing's changed. I'll send you copies of everything I have. Use it to protect yourself." I nodded, standing on shaky legs. "Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry I misjudged you." As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, anger, fear, but underneath it all, a steely determination was forming. I wouldn't be their victim any longer. Ethan was waiting when I walked in, his face a mask of concern. "Where have you been?" "I've been worried sick." I forced a smile. "Just needed some air to clear my head after last night." He nodded, reaching for my hand. I fought the urge to recoil. "I'm sorry about how things went. We all said things we didn't mean. But I think I have a solution." "Oh?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Ethan led me to the dining room where Cecilia was waiting with a stack of papers. My stomach dropped. "We've drawn up some documents," Ethan explained, "just to help manage the inheritance. For your own protection, of course." I glanced at the papers, recognizing power of attorney forms. They were really going through with it. "I don't know," I said, feigning uncertainty. "This is a big decision. Can I have some time to think about it?" Cecilia's smile was razor sharp. "Of course, dear, but don't take too long. We wouldn't want things to get messy." As they talked, outlining their plans for my father's legacy, I felt a calm settle over me. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed quietly. Peter's files had arrived. I excused myself, retreating to the bathroom. As I scrolled through the damning evidence, a plan began to form. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "Game on," I whispered to my reflection. Returning to the dining room, I plastered on a smile. "All right," I said, picking up the pen. "Let's talk about these documents." Ethan and Cecilia exchanged triumphant glances, unaware that their carefully laid plans were about to come crashing down around them. The final act was about to begin, and I was ready to reclaim my life and my father's legacy, once and for all. I stood in the living room of Ethan's parents' house, my heart pounding but my resolve unshakable. Around me, the faces of the Prescott family, including Ethan and Cecilia, ranged from confused to suspicious. "Laura, dear," Ethan's mother began, "what's this all about? Why have you called us all here?" I took a deep breath. "I have something important to share with all of you, something that will change everything." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Laura, whatever you're thinking—" "No," I cut him off firmly. "You've done enough talking. Now it's my turn." I pulled out my tablet and connected it to the TV. "What you're about to see and hear might shock you, but I assure you, it's all true." As I played the recordings Peter had given me, the room fell into stunned silence. Ethan and Cecilia's voices filled the air, detailing their plans to manipulate me, to steal my inheritance, to have me declared incompetent. Ethan's father stood up, his face red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" "It means," I said, my voice steady, "that your son and daughter have been plotting against me since before my father died. They've lied, cheated, and manipulated everyone in this room." Cecilia lunged forward. "You bitch! You have no proof." "I have every proof," I interrupted, pulling out a stack of documents. Bank statements showing mysterious transfers, emails detailing your plans, even a recorded confession from Peter about how you blackmailed him into helping you. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan's mother was sobbing, his father shouting. Cecilia was screaming denials while Ethan stood frozen, his face ashen. I raised my voice above the din. I'm not finished. There's more. I played the final recording, a conversation between Ethan and his mistress, planning their future with my money. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's father turned to him, his voice shaking with rage. Is this true? Have you brought this disgrace upon our family? Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat. Dad, I can explain. Get out, his father growled. Both of you. You're no longer welcome in this family. As Ethan and Cecilia were ushered out, hurling accusations and threats, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. Ethan's mother approached me, tears in her eyes. Laura, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. I squeezed her hand gently. I know. You're victims in this too. As I prepared to leave, Ethan's father stopped me. What will you do now? I smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in months. I'm going to honor my father's legacy, the way he would have wanted. Driving home, I reflected on the whirlwind of events that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the pain, the fear, but also the strength I'd found within myself. I pulled into my driveway, noticing a familiar figure waiting on the porch. Peter. I heard what happened, he said as I approached. Are you okay? I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I am. Thank you for your help, Peter. I couldn't have done this without you. He shifted awkwardly. Laura, I know I messed up before, but I was wondering. I held up a hand, stopping him. Peter, I appreciate everything you've done, but right now I need to focus on myself, on healing. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He nodded, offering a small smile. Of course. Take care of yourself, Laura. As I watched him walk away, I felt the last pieces of my old life falling away. I entered the house, my house now truly mine, and looked around. The rooms that had once felt suffocating now held promise. I picked up a framed photo of my father, tracing his smiling face. I did it, Dad, I whispered. I protected what you built, and I found myself along the way. Setting the photo down, I walked to the window and looked out at the setting sun. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as new opportunities, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face them. Not as a victim, not as someone's wife or daughter, but as Laura, strong, resilient, and finally truly free.